Hello. Dive in. Stories await. Okay, so every year, our high school hosted this mandatory science fair. And let me tell you, no one took it seriously, except for kids like Jared, who wore lab coats unironically and talked about chemistry like it was a religion. The rest of us? We slapped together whatever garbage we could find the night before and prayed for a passing grade. Baking soda volcanoes? Classic. Some kid one year literally just brought his microwave and said he was studying radiation. He still got AB. Anyway, this particular year, my friend Kevin decided we should make something memorable. Kevin, mind you, was not known for his intelligence. This is the same guy who once tried to microwave aluminum foil to see what would happen. Spoiler, the fire department happened. So when he said we should go big, I knew we were in trouble. We should build a rocket, Kevin said one night, completely serious. A real rocket? I asked. Like, with fire and everything? Kevin nodded like this was the most obvious thing in the world. Yeah, how hard can it be? NASA does it all the time. I should have known better than to agree. But I was 17 and stupid, and Kevin was very convincing. So the two of us spent the next few nights on YouTube, watching questionable videos with titles like How to Build a Rocket Engine from Household Items. If a website had DIY and flammable in the same sentence, we were there. Somehow, miraculously, we managed to build a working model. More or less. It was basically a metal tube filled with ingredients we were 90% sure could ignite. We duct taped the fins on because nothing says structurally sound like duct tape, and topped it off with a cardboard cone. Honestly, it looked kind of legit. We even gave it a name, the Falcon 0, because 0 was the number of test flights we ran before launching it in front of half the school. So the day of the science fair arrives. The cafeteria is packed with folding tables, trifold poster boards, and sad little projects like the effects of music on plants. Jared was setting up some kind of nuclear reactor. Okay, it was just a fancy light bulb, but he was way too proud of it. And there we were, standing behind Falcon 0, grinning like idiots. The plan was simple. We do a quick demonstration launch on the soccer field during the fair. Just a little show and tell, nothing crazy. The thing was only supposed to fly like 10 feet into the air, 15 max. Kevin swore he calculated. I don't know how, since the closest thing he'd ever calculated was his Taco Bell order, but I trusted him. Big mistake. When it was our turn, we rolled the Falcon 0 out to the field, right in front of a crowd of students, teachers, and a few unsuspecting parents who were just trying to support their kids baking soda volcanoes. Everyone was watching us, phones out, Snapchatting the whole thing. We were about to become legends. Kevin knelt down, lit the fuse, and whispered, "Get ready." The fuse burned faster than we expected, like way faster. In the blink of an eye, the Falcon 0 roared to life with a deafening whoosh and shot off the ground at Mach Jesus. When I tell you this thing took off, I mean it disappeared into the sky. 1 second it was there, the next second it was gone, leaving behind a trail of black smoke and about 1,000 people standing there with their jaws on the floor. That was not 10 feet, I whispered. Kevin looked pale. Yeah, I think I miscalculated. You think, Kevin? At first, everyone was clapping, cheering like, wow, they actually did it. But then we noticed the rocket wasn't coming back down. We all just stood there, staring at the sky, waiting for Falcon 0 to return from orbit. Minutes passed. Nothing. I started sweating. Kevin was muttering calculations under his breath. But all he came up with was, we're so screwed. And then we heard it, a faint, distant boom. We froze. I turned to Kevin. What was that? Kevin's eyes widened. That might have been Falcon 0. At that exact moment, the walkie-talkies on the teachers' belts crackled to life. Yeah, we've got a situation. Something just hit the faculty parking lot. Kevin and I looked at each other like, oh shit. We bolted toward the parking lot, with half the science fair trailing behind us like it was some twisted parade. When we got there, we saw it, the smoking wreckage of the Falcon 0, embedded in Mr. Thompson's windshield. Mr. Thompson, our notoriously angry gym teacher, was standing next to his car, staring at the rocket lodged in his windshield like it was a personal attack on his soul. As I was twitching, I swear I could hear the Jaws theme playing in the background. Who did this? He bellowed, veins popping out of his neck. Who built this thing? Kevin, being the absolute coward that he is, immediately pointed at me. It was his idea. I could have strangled him right then and there. But before I could say anything, Mr. Thompson turned on me like a bull who'd just seen red. "You better start running, kid." So I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because honestly, it did. Behind me, I could hear Mr. Thompson's heavy footfalls and the sounds of Kevin desperately trying to explain that it was just a science project. But Mr. Thompson was having none of it. He was out for blood. I made it halfway across the soccer field before I felt his massive hand clamp down on the back of my shirt. "Gotcha, you little..." And that's when Falcon Zero's final gift to us arrived. The police. Apparently, launching homemade rockets without any kind of permit is highly illegal. Who knew? A patrol car screeched to a stop right next to us, and 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Everybody freeze!" Mr. Thompson let go of me so fast, you'd think I was radioactive. I hit the ground, hands in the air, while Kevin stood there, pale as a ghost, still holding the rocket's instruction manual like it was some kind of peace offering. Long story short, we got hauled off to the principal's office, where we were told that we'd jeopardized the safety of the entire school. Kevin tried explaining that it was all in the name of science, but the principal just stared at us like we'd personally offended Isaac Newton. In the end, we didn't get expelled, but we were banned from all future science fairs. Kevin's parents grounded him for 6 months, and I had to write a personal apology letter to Mr. Thompson and pay for his windshield. The Falcon Zero? It was confiscated by the police as evidence. I like to think it's sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered by future generations of idiots. And to this day, whenever I see a rocket launch on TV, I think that could have been us if we weren't so damn stupid. You ever have one of those moments where you know, absolutely know, that you should listen to your gut, but for some reason, you just don't? Yeah, that was me, standing in the middle of nowhere, next to a broken-down gas pump at 2 a.m., regretting every single life choice that had led me to this moment. Let me backtrack. I was on a road trip to visit my sister, who lives about 6 hours away. The drive wasn't supposed to be complicated, just straight highways and a few turns through sleepy little towns. But somewhere along the way, my phone died, and with it went my GPS and music. I figured I'd wing it for the rest of the trip. Big mistake. The first warning sign was the weather. Out of nowhere, a thick blanket of fog rolled in, the kind that eats headlights and turns the world into a white blur. My car's gas needle was dangerously close to E, and I was nowhere near a main road. Eventually, I spotted one of those old gas stations you only see in horror movies, the kind with flickering lights, a half-broken sign, and not a soul in sight. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would you stop there? Trust me, I wish I hadn't. But when you're running on fumes, you're not exactly spoiled for choice. I pulled into the lot, parked next to the one pump that didn't look completely rusted, and stepped out of the car. The air was cold, too cold for October, and the whole place smelled like damp concrete and something metallic like old pennies. A single flickering light above the pump gave everything this weird, eerie glow. Still, I told myself, fill the tank, get back in the car, and go. Simple. Except the pump didn't work. I jiggled the nozzle. Nothing. The screen was dark, and the buttons didn't respond. I glanced around, hoping to find some sort of help, but the station looked abandoned. The windows to the little convenience store were boarded up, and the door was chained shut, as if someone had locked it in a hurry. That's when I noticed the payphone. Yeah, an actual payphone bolted to the wall near the entrance. I figured, why not? Maybe someone in the area can tell me where the nearest open station is. I walked over to the phone, picked up the receiver, and pressed it to my ear. Silence. Not even static. Great. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My first thought was it's just the wind, but then I heard it again, this low, deliberate shuffle like someone dragging their feet across gravel. My heart started pounding. Slowly, I turned around expecting to see, I don't know, maybe an animal or something. Instead, I saw him, a man standing just at the edge of the fog, barely visible in the dim light. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, perfectly still like a statue. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew he was looking at me, watching me. My instinct screamed, get back in the car. Now! I dropped the phone and took a step back toward my car, my pulse hammering in my ears. The man didn't move. He just stood there, half obscured by the fog, his head tilted slightly to the side, like he was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Every alarm bell in my brain was going off at once. I reached for the car door handle, and that's when he took a step forward. I swear, my heart stopped. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step crunching on the gravel beneath his feet. It wasn't a fast walk, more like a predator taking its time. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming the lock down just as he reached the pump. For a second, we just stared at each other through the glass, his face still lost in shadow. Then slowly, so damn slowly, he raised one hand and tapped on the window with his fingernail. Tap, tap, tap. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. Nothing. The engine sputtered but wouldn't start. Panic surged through me. I tried again. Come on, come on, come on. The man leaned closer, his face almost pressed against the window now. I could see him more clearly. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark. And he was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was the kind of smile you see on someone who enjoys hurting things. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse. The tires screeched as I backed away from the pump, my headlights cutting through the fog in jagged beams. I shifted into drive and floored it, my heart racing as the station disappeared behind me. I didn't stop driving. I didn't even look back. I just kept going, adrenaline pumping through me like rocket fuel. It wasn't until I hit the main road, miles later, that I finally let myself breathe. I told myself it was over, that I was safe now. But the thing is, the fear didn't leave me. Even now, weeks later, I can still feel it. Every time I'm alone in my car, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man standing there, smiling at me from the fog. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and my thoughts are loud, I hear it again, those soft, deliberate taps. Tap, tap, tap. We had been together for 3 years, and I was pretty sure I knew every detail about him. His quirks, his dumb little habits, the way he always added a splash of hot sauce to everything, even popcorn. We weren't perfect, but we had a rhythm. We lived together, shared a Netflix account, split bills. Couple stuff. Or so I thought. It started with his phone. Funny how many of these stories start with a phone, right? Except this wasn't about hiding it. He was still leaving it around the house like usual. On the couch, the kitchen counter, even in the bathroom. But one day, while he was in the shower, I tried to open it to check the weather. And the passcode had changed. We'd always known each other's passwords. Not because we didn't trust each other, but because it just made life easier. I'd grab his phone to set alarms or play Spotify when mine was dead. He used mine to order food. That's just how it was. So, when the new password lock popped up on his screen, my stomach dropped a little. Just a little. When he came out of the shower, towel slung low on his hips, I tried to sound casual. Hey, did you change your passcode? He froze for the tiniest second, just long enough for my gut to register the hesitation. But then he shrugged it off, wiping his hair with the towel. Oh yeah, I was messing with the settings at work. Forgot to tell you. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But that was the first red flag. Something so small it could have been nothing. Still, it gnawed at me. The thing with red flags is that on their own, they don't scream. They whisper. Over the next few weeks, more little things piled up. First, he started coming home later. He always had excuses. Work was crazy. Had to stop by the gym, grab drinks with some old college buddies. But the thing was, he'd never been a grab drinks kind of guy. And we'd agreed we hated the gym. It was one of those inside jokes that made us feel like we were on the same team. Suddenly, he was team early morning leg day. Then, there was the perfume. One night, when he came home late, again, I leaned in to kiss him and caught a whiff of something floral on his collar. I wear vanilla-scented lotion. Always have. This smelled like jasmine or lilies, or some other delicate, expensive flower I couldn't afford to keep in the house. Smells nice, I said, forcing a smile. He laughed it off. Office was full of samples today, he said. Some vendor's promotion. It was the way he answered, too quickly, like he'd already rehearsed it, that made my heart stutter. But I told myself to let it go, because again, it could have been nothing. I was not going to be that person. The paranoid, jealous girlfriend. I had to trust him, right? That's what love is. Trust. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Trust isn't just a decision. It's a feeling. And mine was slipping away. Then came the weekend trip. He told me about it on a Wednesday, just a few days before he was supposed to leave. The guys want to do a cabin thing, he said over dinner, stabbing at his pasta like it had offended him. You know, one of those no phones, no distractions, just beer and fishing things. I smiled and nodded, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was screaming. Since when did his friends plan spontaneous fishing trips? They were the type to play video games all weekend, not go off-grid into the wilderness. On Friday morning, he left. He kissed me on the forehead, threw his bag in the car, and promised to text when he arrived at the cabin. He didn't. By the time Saturday rolled around, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was imagining things. But the voice in the back of my head wouldn't stop whispering. Something is wrong. Check. So I did. I opened his laptop, hoping I'd find some confirmation of the fishing trip. Maybe an email chain with his friends or a message about the cabin rental. But when I opened his browser history, what I found wasn't an Airbnb reservation. It was a hotel booking for 2 people in a city 2 hours away. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to believe it. I sat with that information for hours, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to call him right away and confront him, but another part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if there was some perfectly innocent explanation? But what if there wasn't? He came back Sunday night, acting like everything was normal. He threw his bag on the floor, kissed me like he hadn't just spent the weekend in a hotel with someone else, and asked if I wanted takeout for dinner. I watched him as he scrolled through his phone, relaxed and carefree, like he hadn't done anything wrong. And that's when it hit me. The worst part of betrayal isn't the act itself. It's the casual way they pretend nothing happened. I didn't say anything that night. I wanted to see if he'd tell me on his own. Maybe he'd confess. Maybe he'd say, "Look, I made a mistake." I think part of me still wanted to believe he was the man I thought he was. But he didn't. He went to bed, kissed me goodnight, and fell asleep like it was just another Sunday. The next morning, I woke up before him, heart racing. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the man I loved, wondering how many other lies he'd told me without blinking. And then, something inside me clicked. I grabbed his phone from the nightstand. The new password he thought I didn't know? I'd figured it out weeks ago. It was our anniversary date backwards. I unlocked the phone, and there it was, the proof I hadn't wanted to find. Texts, photos, a whole secret life tucked neatly into a chat thread. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, as his messages painted a picture of the weekend he'd just had. Not with the guys, with her. I put the phone down, careful not to wake him, and walked into the living room. I sat on the couch, numb, as the weight of it all came crashing down on me. I didn't wake him up. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. I just sat there, because in that moment I realized something important. Love is supposed to make you feel safe. And I hadn't felt safe with him in a long time. When he finally woke up and came looking for me, I was already packed. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic flickering across his face. I looked him in the eye, calm as a whisper, somewhere I don't have to guess. And just like that, I walked out the door. I remember sitting in front of my closet, completely paralyzed. I'd promised myself I'd try dating again. One more time, just a simple first date. No expectations, no hopes of finding the one. But still, my stomach was in knots, and I couldn't decide what to wear. Do I go casual to show I'm chill? Dress up to show I care? I finally threw on a sweater that said, "I tried, but not too hard," and left before I could talk myself out of going. The guy? His name was Jason. We matched on one of those apps. I honestly forget which. Bumble? Hinge? They all blur together after a while. But he seemed nice enough. Decent smile, didn't immediately hit me with a "Hey sexy, were you up?" And bonus points, he could hold a conversation. A rare commodity these days. We met at a quiet bar downtown. I arrived first and grabbed a booth in the corner. When he walked in, I waved, and the first thing I noticed was that his profile pictures did him some serious justice. Tall, clean-shaven, and with that boy-next-door vibe that makes you want to believe in good guys again. Things started off well. He ordered a whiskey. I got my usual gin and tonic. We talked about our jobs, me in marketing, him in software development. I kept waiting for the conversation to hit that awkward lull where I'd have to carry it. But to my surprise, it didn't. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I could feel the tension in my shoulders loosen a little. Maybe this won't be a disaster after all, I thought. He even asked follow-up questions like actual, thoughtful ones. Not the typical, so, what do you do for fun? Script guys pull from the handbook of lazy dating. He laughed at my sarcasm, and I laughed when he told me about the time he accidentally joined a yoga class for senior citizens because he misread the flyer. For the first time in a while, I found myself enjoying the date. I wasn't overanalyzing everything I said or trying to present the most polished version of myself. It felt normal, refreshing, even, and after a couple of hours when the conversation was still flowing smoothly, I started to think maybe I could see this going somewhere. Then came the moment, the one where everything shifts, and you realize that the spark you thought you felt might not be what you expected. It happened right after I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I'd been gone for, what, 5 minutes? Tops. But when I came back to the table, Jason was on his phone, scrolling through Instagram like we weren't in the middle of a date. Not a quick glance, not checking a message, full-on scrolling. I sat down quietly, waiting for him to put it away. He didn't, just kept scrolling, thumb moving up the screen in a steady rhythm, completely absorbed. I gave it a minute, thinking maybe he's checking something important. But no, another minute passed, then another. And there I was sitting across from a guy who seemed more invested in his social feed than in the woman sitting in front of him. When he finally noticed me sitting there, he looked up, smiled sheepishly, and said, "Sorry, just had to check something." I wanted to ask, what? Your ego? But instead, I forced a tight-lipped smile and said, "No worries." Except it was a worry, a big one, because that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a phone. It was about presence. The guy who had seemed so interested and engaged just moments ago was now mentally miles away, lost in the endless scroll of curated photos and meaningless memes. And it wasn't the first time I'd seen this. Hell, I've been that person, mindlessly refreshing my notifications instead of being fully present with someone. But when you're sitting across from someone who's supposed to be giving you their time, their attention, and they can't even look up from their phone for 5 minutes, it's a slap in the face. I try to brush it off. We finished our drinks, made some more small talk, and when the bill came, he paid without hesitation. A gentleman at least. But the magic, if there had been any, was gone, and I couldn't unsee it. The subtle but clear reminder that, in today's world, you're always competing with a screen. When we said goodnight, he leaned in for a hug. I gave him one, but it felt hollow. As he walked away, I found myself standing there in the cold, wondering what the hell I was doing. Was this really what dating had become? A series of half-hearted encounters where people are only half present. 1 foot always in the digital world? On the drive home, I thought about how dating used to feel when I was younger. The excitement, the butterflies, the feeling that every new connection could lead to something meaningful. But now it just feels like work. Exhausting, unfulfilling work. I didn't text Jason after that, and he didn't text me either. No, had a great time. Let's do it again. No post-date debrief. Just silence. A mutual fade out. And the saddest part? I wasn't even surprised. Because this is what dating feels like these days. A constant stream of almosts. Almost interested. Almost connected. Almost something more until they get distracted, lose interest, or swipe right on someone new. It's hard not to get cynical after a while. Hard not to feel like you're just another option in someone's dating queue. And every time you put yourself out there, hoping this time will be different, you're reminded that it's not. I think that's what ruined dating for me in the end. Not the bad dates or the ghosting. Not even the endless parade of people who say one thing but mean another. It's the slow realization that no one really wants to show up fully anymore. Not when it's so much easier to retreat behind a screen. So now, when someone asks if I'm seeing anyone, I just smile and say, not really. Because how do you explain that it's not the dating itself that's exhausting? It's the trying to get someone to care. trying to connect in a world that's more disconnected than ever. And honestly, I'm tired of trying. Maybe one day, I'll meet someone who makes me want to try again. But until then, I'm keeping my heart to myself. I've learned that it's safer that way. You know how some jobs seem like they should take, 10 minutes tops? Like you're thinking, how hard can it be? Well, let me tell you about the day my arrogance and a garage door spring nearly punched my ticket to the afterlife. It all started on a Saturday morning. I had big plans for the day. Nothing too exciting, just a little home improvement. The garage door had been acting up for a while, refusing to close unless you sweet-talked the remote like it was a stubborn toddler. I figured the problem had to be something simple, probably a loose bolt or some dust on the sensor. But when I got the ladder out and inspected the whole thing, it became pretty clear one of the main springs looked like it had gone through Vietnam. Rusty, stretched to its limit, and probably one good pull away from snapping in half. If you've never seen a garage door spring before, let me explain. These things aren't just there to look pretty. They're wound tighter than a piano wire, designed to counterbalance the weight of the door. The moment one breaks, it's game over. All that stored tension releases instantly. And if you're in the wrong place, well, let's just say there won't be a second place. Now, a sensible person might have called a professional to handle it. But me? I'd watched a couple of DIY videos on YouTube and thought, how hard can it be? I had my toolbox, a few beers, and an overconfidence that could rival a frat bro at a karaoke bar. Step one was simple enough. Disconnect the garage door from the opener. Easy. Then I used a wrench to loosen the bolts holding the old spring in place. Everything was going smoothly, too smoothly in hindsight. With the bolts loosened, I figured the tension on the spring would release gradually, like air from a balloon. Spoiler alert, that is not how physics works. As soon as the last bolt came off, the entire spring exploded with a sound like a gunshot. 1 second, I was standing there, wrench in hand. The next, I was on the floor wondering if I just died. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what had happened. There was this high-pitched ringing in my ears, and everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I remember thinking, is this what people mean when they say they saw the light? When I finally shook off the confusion, I realized that the spring had snapped loose, whipping around like a snake on Red Bull. It took out the light bulb in the ceiling, shattered the window on the garage door, and left a jagged scar across the drywall. I was lucky, stupidly lucky, because if I had been standing 2 inches to the left, that spring would have whipped across my face. Instead, it clipped my shoulder hard enough to leave a nasty bruise and rip a hole in my shirt. I stared at the broken spring, heart pounding in my chest, and thought I just almost died, fixing a goddamn garage door. The adrenaline hit me like a freight train. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't even pick up my tools. All I could do was sit there on the floor, stunned, and trying to process what had just happened. I kept thinking, what if that had hit my neck? I would have bled out right there in the garage, and the only thing anyone would have found was my dumb ass lying under a busted spring with a wrench in my hand. At some point, my wife poked her head into the garage. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, blissfully unaware that I had just tangoed with death and barely lived to tell the tale. "Yeah," I croaked, still in shock. "Just cleaning up?" She gave me one of those "you were so hopeless" looks and went back inside. I sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at the mess, trying to calm down. I couldn't believe how close I had come to buying the farm over something as dumb as a garage door spring. I mean, who dies like that? What would they even put on my tombstone? "Here lies Dave, conquered by home repairs." Eventually, I pulled myself together and called a professional to finish the job. Best $200 I ever spent, by the way. The guy showed up, took one look at the busted spring, and said, "You're lucky to be alive." I didn't argue. Since then, I've developed a deep respect for anything under tension, springs, cables, you name it. If it's got stored energy and could potentially whip around like an angry octopus, I'm out. No more DIY death traps for me. You want me to hang a picture frame? Sure, I got you. But if it involves tools, tension, or anything remotely spring-loaded, I'm picking up the phone and calling a pro. The thing that still haunts me isn't just the close call. It's how fast it all happened. One moment, I was feeling like Bob the Builder, in control and ready to knock out a simple repair. The next, I was flat on my back, one dumb decision away from being a headline. Local man dies in bizarre garage accident. The scariest part? No one would have seen it coming. Just like that, in the blink of an eye, gone. I wasn't messing with heavy machinery, or climbing a mountain, or swimming with sharks. I was just fixing a garage door. That's what sticks with me the most. The sheer unpredictability of it all. Death doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sneaks up on you in the most mundane places. So yeah, if there's one thing you take away from my little near-death experience, let it be this: leave the dangerous stuff to the professionals. Your life is worth more than the satisfaction of saying you fixed it yourself. Trust me, because in the grand scheme of things, nobody gives a damn if you saved a couple $100. But if you get yourself killed, well, that's a different story, one you won't be around to tell. Now every time I walk past the garage door, I give it a little side eye like, I know what you tried to do, you bastard. And just to be safe, I always make sure I'm standing at least 5 feet away when I hit the opener. Some lessons? They stick with you forever. I went into that night with the cocky confidence of someone who thought they had it all figured out. I mean, how hard could it be? Meet someone hot, have a great time, and walk away the next morning feeling smug and carefree. Easy, right? Spoiler alert, it was not easy. It all started at this dive bar my friends dragged me to. It wasn't even my scene: sticky floors, dim lighting, a jukebox playing songs older than my parents. But after a few shots of tequila, I was in the kind of mood that says, why the hell not? That's when I spotted her. She had this short, messy haircut and wore a leather jacket like she was auditioning to be the lead singer of a punk band. I was immediately hooked. There's just something about people who look like they could either kiss you or ruin your life, and I was down for either option. It took me all of 2 drinks to work up the courage to talk to her. I sauntered over, said something painfully lame like, "So, do you come here often?" And, bless her heart, she didn't even laugh at me. She smiled and said, "Not really. I usually prefer bars that aren't fire hazards." I knew right then. This girl was trouble, and I was all in. We talked. We flirted. She gave me a look that said, "Let's get out of here," and before I knew it, we were in an Uber, making out in the back seat like we were teenagers sneaking around before curfew. The driver gave us that exhausted, seen it all before look, and honestly, I respected him for it. We ended up at her apartment, which was exactly what you'd expect. Minimal furniture, band posters taped to the walls, and a suspiciously empty fridge. It was the kind of place that screamed, I'm too busy having fun to care about home decor. And somehow, that made me like her even more. Things heated up fast. And before I knew it, we were tangled in her sheets, lost in the kind of night that makes you forget there's a world outside the room. It was fun. It was messy. It was everything a one-night stand is supposed to be. No strings, no awkward conversations, just pure, chaotic energy. But then the morning came, and that's when things got complicated. I woke up to the sound of her rummaging through the fridge, muttering something about expired milk. My brain was still foggy from the night before, but I was coherent enough to know that this was the part where I should make a graceful exit. Instead, I just lay there, watching her move around the kitchen like we were an old married couple and wondering what the hell am I doing? She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "Want some coffee?" I should have said no. I know I should have said no. But instead, my dumbass said, "Sure." And just like that, I was sitting at her tiny kitchen table, sipping bad coffee out of a chipped mug and realizing that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as cut out for casual hookups as I thought I was. She sat across from me, looking infuriatingly cool, even with bedhead and no makeup. We made small talk. Movies we liked, places we wanted to travel, the weirdness of our dreams from the night before. And the more we talked, the more I found myself thinking I could get used to this. Which, of course, was not the plan. The plan was to have fun and leave. No attachments, no feelings, just a one-and-done kind of deal. But there I was, sitting in her kitchen, fantasizing about brunch dates and road trips, and wondering what her favorite pizza toppings were. Then she hit me with a line that shattered the fantasy. "So, this was fun, right? No woodenis." And there it was, the universal sign that this was in fact just a one-night thing. No strings, no follow-ups, no future. Just 2 people who crossed paths for one night and were now parting ways. I forced a smile and nodded. Yeah, no weirdness. But here's the thing. There was weirdness. At least for me. Somewhere between tequila shots and tangled sheets, I had crossed an invisible line, and now I was stuck on the other side, wondering why it suddenly felt so hard to walk away. I left her apartment with a polite hug and a casual, "Take care," but inside, I felt like I just lost something I hadn't even realized I wanted. As I walked home, I kept replaying the night in my head, trying to figure out where I went wrong. Was it the coffee? The conversation? The way she smiled at me across the table like we were in some indie romance film? By the time I got back to my apartment, I had come to a brutal realization. I am not built for casual sex. I thought I could keep things light and carefree, but the truth is I crave connection. I want to know someone's favorite pizza toppings. I want brunch dates and road trips and lazy Sunday mornings. And pretending otherwise only makes things messy. I don't regret that night. It was fun, and for a few hours, it was exactly what I needed. But it also showed me that I can't do this the way some people can. And that's okay. Not everyone is cut out for the hookup life, and there's no shame in wanting more than just a night. So, lesson learned. Next time I get the urge to dive into a casual fling, I'll remind myself that it's okay to want more. It's okay to crave connection. And it's okay to say no to things that don't align with what you really want. And who knows? Maybe someday, I'll meet someone who feels the same way. Until then, I'll just stick to brunch dates with my friends and leave the one-night stands to people who are better at detaching than I am. The bus broke down 3 miles from town. I was the only passenger left by then. Just me, the driver, and the weight of everything I didn't want to face waiting at the end of the road. The driver gave me an apologetic shrug, said something about a tow truck being on the way, and lit a cigarette like this sort of thing happened all the time. "You can wait here if you want," he said, blowing smoke out into the rain. "Town's not far," I mumbled, slinging my bag over my shoulder. The walk wasn't what I'd planned, but that's the thing about plans. They unravel the moment you rely on them too much. The rain soaked through my jacket in minutes, and the wind cut through my clothes like they weren't even there. I kept my head down and walked fast, focusing on the sound of my boots squelching through puddles. I hadn't been back in 5 years, but the road still felt familiar. Same cracked asphalt, same sagging power lines swaying in the breeze. A part of me had hoped it would feel different, like the distance would have softened the edges of this place, but it hadn't. The town still carried the same weight. It always had a quiet sort of gravity, pulling me back whether I wanted it or not. When I finally reached my sister's house, the porch light was on, flickering faintly in the rain. I stood at the bottom of the steps, dripping and shivering, feeling like a kid who had wandered too far from home and didn't know how to get back. The door opened before I could knock. "Jesus, Aaron," Lila said, staring at me with a mix of relief and exasperation. "What are you doing out there?" Bus broke down. She shook her head and pulled me inside, muttering about how I never had the sense to call ahead. The warmth of the house hit me all at once, and I realized just how cold I'd been. "Here," Lila said, handing me a towel. "You look like a drowned rat." I mumbled a thanks and wiped my face, avoiding her gaze. She hadn't seen me in years, not since the night I left town without telling anyone, and I could tell she had questions. But to her credit, she didn't ask. "Not yet." "You hungry?" she asked instead. I shook my head. "Just tired." She nodded slowly like she understood. "Guest room's ready." Same as before. The guest room was small and smelled faintly of laundry detergent. I dropped my bag by the bed and sat down, the springs creaking beneath my weight. Outside, the rain drummed softly against the windows, and I felt the exhaustion settle into my bones. But sleep didn't come easily. It never did. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the house breathing around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows, felt like a reminder of all the things I'd left behind. Things I'd thought I could outrun, but had followed me here anyway. In the morning, the rain had stopped. Lila was in the kitchen, making pancakes like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked over her shoulder when I walked in, her expression guarded but not unkind. "Coffee?" "Sure." She poured me a mug, and we sat at the table in a silence that felt heavier than words. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting the warmth settle in my chest. "So," she said after a while, "you planning to stick around this time?" The question hung in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. I don't know, I admitted. She gave me a look that was equal parts disappointment and understanding. You never do. I wanted to argue, to tell her that it wasn't fair, that life was complicated. But the truth was she wasn't wrong. I'd always been good at leaving. It was the staying part that I couldn't figure out. I started, but the words got stuck in my throat. You just what? She asked, not unkindly. I looked down at my coffee, tracing the rim of the mug with my thumb. I don't know how to be here. Not really. Lila sighed, leaning back in her chair. No one does, Aaron. That's the trick. I laughed, but it came out more like a cough. I thought it was just me. She smiled, a small, tired thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. It never is. We sat there for a while, the silence between us shifting into something softer, something almost comfortable. It was strange being back here, strange but not as unbearable as I'd imagined. After breakfast, Lila handed me a list of errands. Figured you could help out while you're here, she said with a shrug, like it wasn't a big deal. I nodded, tucking the list into my pocket. It was the kind of thing she used to do when we were kids, giving me little tasks to keep me busy, like she knew that if I stayed still too long, I'd start thinking too much. The first stop was the grocery store. It hadn't changed much. Same aisles, same flickering overhead lights. I grabbed everything on Lila's list and was heading toward the checkout when I ran into someone I hadn't expected to see. Claire. She was standing by the produce section, squinting at a bag of oranges like she wasn't sure if they were worth the effort. Claire. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw the same flicker of surprise in her eyes that I felt in my chest. Aaron, she said, her voice cautious, but not cold. Didn't think I'd see you back here. Yeah, well, surprise. She smiled, just a small one, but it was enough to make my heart ache in a way I hadn't expected. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, like two actors who'd forgotten their lines. Then she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and asked, How long are you staying? I'm not sure yet. She nodded, as if she'd been expecting that answer. Well, it's good to see you. You too. I watched her walk away, the moment slipping through my fingers before I even had a chance to hold on to it. When I got back to Lila's, she was sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea and watching the clouds drift across the sky. Run into anyone interesting? She asked, not looking at me. Claire. Lila hummed, as if that told her everything she needed to know. She's doing okay. I added, though I wasn't sure if that was for Lila's benefit or my own. She always does, Lila said softly. We sat in silence for a while, the porch creaking beneath us, the air heavy with things left unsaid. You don't have to figure it all out right now, you know, Lila said eventually. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed her. I mean it, she said, glancing over at me. Just stay for a little while. See what happens. It sounded simple, the way she said it, but I knew better. Nothing about staying was ever simple. Still, I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle around me. Maybe, just maybe this time I'd try. Honestly, I have no idea how it happened. One minute, Sam and I were on his couch watching our usual dumb reality show, something about people getting married without ever meeting each other. And the next minute, well, things got complicated. I guess I should back up. Sam has been my best friend since college. We've been through everything together, bad breakups, worse hangovers, and that one road trip where the car broke down in the middle of nowhere and we spent 6 hours talking about what we'd do in a zombie apocalypse. He thinks we'd make it 6 months tops. I say a week, maybe. Anyway, nothing romantic had ever happened between us. We were like peanut butter and jelly, better together but strictly platonic. Sure, people sometimes assumed we were a couple. Our moms were certain we'd end up married, but it never even crossed my mind. Until that night. It was one of those lazy Friday nights where neither of us felt like going out. Sam suggested I come over for pizza and beer. It was raining, and I didn't have anything better to do, so I showed up in sweats, hair in a messy bun, zero expectations. We devoured the pizza in minutes and cracked open some beers while watching trash TV, both of us lounging on his worn-out couch like two old cats. At some point, during a ridiculous fight on screen, apparently, not wanting to share toothpaste as grounds for divorce, I said, imagine if we got married. Bet we do better than these clowns. Sam grinned. Oh, for sure. At least we already know how to share food without murdering each other. We laughed, and it was just an innocent, silly joke, except something shifted in the air. You know that weird moment where you suddenly realize someone you've known forever is kind of attractive? It hit me out of nowhere. Like, damn, when did his arms get that nice? I blamed the beer and tried to shake it off, but then Sam gave me this soft smile, the kind that said, I know you better than anyone. And before I could stop myself, I thought, what if? I swear I didn't plan it. But then Sam leaned in, and suddenly we were kissing. And not just a friendly, hey, I love you, man kind of kiss. No, this was the kind of kiss that makes your stomach flip and your brain go offline. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought he could hear it. When we finally pulled away, both of us were breathing hard, staring at each other like we couldn't believe what just happened. I opened my mouth to say something, but Sam beat me to it. So, that just happened. I laughed, because honestly, what else could I do? Yeah, it did. And then, because I have the emotional maturity of a potato, I added, want to make it weird? He smirked. Too late. Before I could second-guess myself, I kissed him again. One thing led to another, and next thing I knew, we were tangled up in his bed, my heart racing in a way it hadn't in a long time. It felt good, natural, even, but also terrifying. This was Sam, my best friend, the one person I could always count on. And now we were naked in his bed. Afterward, we lay there in silence, both of us staring at the ceiling like it held the answers to all of life's problems. I knew we had crossed a line, one we couldn't uncross, and I had no idea what it meant. Sam finally broke the silence. So, what now? I turned to him, my heart in my throat. I have no idea. Do we just pretend this never happened? He looked at me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Do you want to pretend? I didn't. I really didn't. But admitting that felt too big, too risky. So I gave him the world's most non-committal shrug. I don't know. Do you? He let out a breath, then pulled me closer, resting his chin on top of my head. Let's just sleep on it, he murmured. Figure it out in the morning. Spoiler alert, we did not figure it out in the morning, or the day after that. In fact, for the next couple of weeks, we kept sleeping together, but refused to talk about what it meant. It was like we were playing chicken with our emotions, both of us too scared to admit we might want something more. It was fun, though. We'd have these lazy Sunday mornings, wrapped up in each other, making pancakes, and pretending we were just two friends who sometimes happened to end up naked. But the truth was, I was falling for him. Hard. The problem? I had no idea if he felt the same way, or if I was just convenient. It all came to a head one night at a party. We'd gone together, like always, but halfway through the night, I saw him talking to some girl. She was tall, blonde, and way too pretty, and for some reason it hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized I was jealous, like stupidly, irrationally jealous. I tried to play it cool, but Sam noticed. He always noticed. You okay? He asked when we stepped outside for some air. I crossed my arms, feeling ridiculous. Yeah, He gave me that look, the one that said, don't bullshit me. All right, no, I admit it. I'm not fine. I hate that I'm jealous, and I hate that I don't know where we stand. What are we doing, Sam? For a moment, he didn't say anything. I braced myself for the worst, him telling me it was just casual, that I was overthinking it. But instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I don't want anyone else, he said quietly. I want you. And just like that, everything clicked into place. All the fear, the confusion, the awkwardness, it melted away, leaving only the truth. I want you too, I whispered. We stood there for a moment, just staring at each other, and then he pulled me into the kind of kiss that makes you feel like you're finally exactly where you're supposed to be. That was 6 months ago. We're still figuring things out, how to be best friends and something more, but it's good. Better than I ever imagined. And you know what? Our moms were right all along. Not that we're telling them that. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was working at a music festival as a volunteer. It was one of those outdoor weekend-long events, held in the middle of nowhere, where everyone camps out. My friend Jess and I had signed up for volunteer shifts together, mostly to score free tickets and have some fun. The crowd was a mix of people, mostly friendly, some weird, but overall harmless. At least, that's what we thought at first. Our shift ended just before midnight, and we were excited to finally relax and enjoy the night. Jess knew some guys who were hanging out by one of the smaller stages, so we wandered over to meet them. By this point, everyone was buzzing on festival energy, some on booze, others on God knows what. But it was fun. Loud music, neon lights, strangers laughing and dancing around campfires. It was exactly what you'd expect from a festival in the middle of nowhere. Around 2 a.m., Jess decided she wanted to crash in the tent, but I wasn't ready to call it a night yet. I told her I'd walk her back and then maybe hang out a bit longer. We were camped on the edge of the festival grounds, near the tree line, away from most of the noise. As we got closer to the tent, the party sounds faded and everything felt different. Quieter, not peaceful. More like too quiet, like the silence was trying to tell me something. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. Just figured the exhaustion was finally catching up. We reached the tent, and Jess crawled inside. "You sure you're coming back?" she asked, looking at me through sleepy eyes. I told her I'd only be gone an hour, tops, and that I'd keep my phone on me. She gave me a lazy thumbs up and zipped the tent closed. I turned back toward the festival grounds, ready to rejoin the chaos. But something made me stop. A weird pressure in my chest, like the air around me had shifted. It was so subtle, but I felt it. That little nagging voice in the back of my head whispered, "Maybe you should just stay here. Go to bed. Call it a night." I ignored it. There was nothing out here but tents and drunk people. What could go wrong? I shrugged off the feeling and started walking back toward the music. About halfway down the path, I noticed something strange. There was a guy standing near the edge of the forest, just off the trail. He was partially hidden by the trees, but I could see enough of him to tell he wasn't part of the festival crowd. He wasn't wearing any bright clothes, no glow sticks or wristbands, just a dark hoodie and jeans. His posture was rigid, like he was waiting for something or someone. The weird part was that he wasn't looking at the festival. He was looking at me. I don't know why, but the way he stood there, completely still like a statue, made my skin crawl. I picked up my pace, suddenly eager to get back to the crowd. As I passed him, I glanced over my shoulder just to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't, but he was still watching. That should have been enough to make me turn around and go back to the tent. But I told myself I was being paranoid. It's just some guy, I thought, probably waiting for his friends or something. I pushed the unease to the back of my mind and kept walking toward the music. When I got back to the stage area, the vibe had shifted. The energy was more chaotic now. People stumbling around, some passed out in the grass, others arguing loudly about nothing. The kind of chaos that feels fun until it doesn't. I tried to enjoy myself, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I kept scanning the crowd, expecting to see the guy in the hoodie lurking somewhere in the shadows. But I didn't see him. After about 20 minutes, I decided I'd had enough. The fun had drained out of the night, replaced by this strange sense of unease. I figured I'd head back to the tent, get some sleep, and feel better in the morning. The walk back was eerie. The music and chatter faded behind me, and soon it was just me, the path, and the soft rustling of trees in the wind. I kept telling myself that everything was fine, that I was just tired and spooking myself for no reason. But the closer I got to our tent, the heavier that feeling of dread became, like I was walking into something I couldn't see. Then I saw it, a shadow moving near the tent. At first, I thought it was Jess, maybe stepping out to go to the bathroom or something. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't her. It was a man crouched low beside the tent, like he was trying to stay out of sight. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was the guy in the hoodie. He didn't see me yet. He was too focused on the tent, his hand slowly unzipping the flap. I froze for a split second, my brain screaming at me to do something. Without thinking, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a large branch lying on the ground, and ran at him, yelling as loud as I could. The guy whipped around, startled, and bolted into the woods. I stood there, panting, the branch still clutched in my hands as my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. I dropped the branch and scrambled to the tent, unzipping it in a panic. Jess sat up, groggy and confused, rubbing her eyes. "What the hell is going on?" she mumbled. I couldn't even speak. I just pulled her out of the tent and told her we needed to leave now. She could tell by the look on my face that I wasn't messing around. We grabbed our bags, stuffed everything into them as fast as we could, and headed toward the parking lot. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the guy in the hoodie watching us from the tree line. But the woods stayed silent. Too silent. We made it to the car without any sign of him. But I didn't relax until we were back on the highway, the festival grounds disappearing in the rearview mirror. Jess kept asking me what had happened, but all I could say was, I just had a bad feeling. I didn't tell her about the guy until much later. Partly because I didn't want to scare her, and partly because I wasn't sure what to make of it myself. A few days after we got home, I checked the festival's online message boards, curious to see if anyone else had mentioned something weird happening that weekend. That's when I saw a post that made my blood run cold. Someone had found a backpack hidden in the woods near the campgrounds. Inside were zip ties, duct tape, and a hunting knife. To this day, I have no doubt the guy in the hoodie was planning something. And if I hadn't come back when I did, I don't even want to think about what might have happened to Jess. This is the story of how prom night went from being a boring, overhyped event to a night no one would ever forget. Mostly because it involved a llama in a tuxedo. Now look, the original plan wasn't that complicated. All we wanted to do was make prom less lame. Every year, it was the same thing. Overpriced tickets, a DJ with a playlist straight out of 2010, and teachers creeping around every corner to make sure no one was doing anything remotely fun. If prom had a flavor, it would be stale crackers. So, a few weeks before the big night, my buddy Jake, who was always full of bad ideas, turned to me during lunch and said, "What if we brought an animal to prom? Like a dog?" I asked. Jake shook his head. "No, man. We need something majestic. Something that will turn heads." And that's when it hit me. "A llama," I said, grinning. "We bring a llama to prom." Now, most people would have dismissed that as a joke. But Jake? He nodded like I had just solved world peace. "A llama in a tux," he added. "We're doing this." From that point on, there was no turning back. The plan was born. How we got a llama, bad idea number one. The first hurdle, of course, was getting a llama. Now, you'd think that would be impossible for two teenagers with no money or connections. But this is where fate, or rather, Jake's sketchy cousin, stepped in. His cousin worked part-time at some kind of petting zoo that was, let's just say, relaxed about its security. Jake swore up and down that we could borrow a llama for one night and return it before anyone noticed. "It's not like they do a head count," he said. "It's just a llama." And because I was young and stupid and had already rented a cheap tuxedo for this poor animal, I agreed. The night before prom, we snuck into the petting zoo with a bag of carrots, and sure enough, there was the llama, just standing there, chewing on grass, looking majestic as hell. "His name is Carl," Jake whispered. "Let's get him suited up." Now, let me tell you, dressing a llama in a tuxedo is not as easy as it sounds. It's like trying to wrestle a very tall, very unbothered toddler. After a lot of cursing and one close call where Carl tried to eat my boutonniere, we finally got him into the tux. He looked amazing, like James Bond, but fluffier. "Dude," Jake whispered, eyes wide. "We're gonna win prom king just for this." I believed him. We were unstoppable. Sneaking Carl into prom, bad idea number two. Getting a llama into prom, however, was another challenge altogether. Our school was hosting the event at some swanky hotel ballroom downtown, and the place was crawling with chaperones. Luckily, Jake had thought ahead. "We just walk in like we belong," he said, as if sneaking a tuxedoed llama past security was no big deal. "Act confident, and they won't question it." And, shockingly, it worked, sort of. We strolled through the hotel lobby with Carl in tow, waving politely at the concierge like it was the most normal thing in the world. The llama? Completely chill, just clomping along like he owned the place. We made it all the way to the ballroom entrance before one of the teachers stopped us. "What is that?" Mrs. Hendricks asked, her eyes narrowing. Jake didn't even blink. "It's a service llama," he said with the confidence of a seasoned con artist. Mrs. Hendricks stared at us, then at Carl, who blinked slowly like he couldn't care less about human drama. After a long pause, she just sighed and waved us in. I guess she decided that whatever was happening wasn't worth her paycheck. We were in. Carl becomes the star of prom. Bad idea number three. The moment we walked into the ballroom, it was like the music stopped. Every head turned to look at us, and more importantly, at Carl, who stood there regal as hell in his tiny tuxedo, chewing thoughtfully on his carrot. It was beautiful. Phones came out immediately. People swarmed around us, taking selfies with Carl, petting him, and trying to feed him whatever snacks they had. The DJ even gave us a shout out. Ladies and gentlemen, the prom just got a whole lot cooler. Make some noise for the llama in the house. The crowd went wild. Jake and I were kings. For the first hour, everything went perfectly. Carl was a hit, everyone loved him, and we were having the time of our lives. Teachers? Nowhere to be seen. It was glorious. And then Carl pooped on the dance floor. Now look, I don't know if you've ever seen llama poop, but it's noticeable. And when Carl decided to let loose, it was right in the middle of Uptown Funk. At first, people thought it was part of the fun. Ha, the llama's pooping. So random. But then the smell hit. And it hit hard. The escape plan, bad idea number 4. As the crowd started to disperse from the epicenter of llama poop, Jake turned to me, panic written all over his face. Dude, we gotta get him out of here. Now! I nodded. Yeah, this has gone too far. We grabbed Carl's leash and started heading for the exit, but that's when everything went sideways. Mrs. Hendricks reappeared, and this time she was not in the mood for our nonsense. "You boys," she shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" Before we could answer, Carl, clearly done with the whole prom experience, spooked. He reared back, yanking the leash out of Jake's hands, and took off at a full sprint. Now, let me paint you a picture. A llama in a tuxedo, galloping through a hotel ballroom, while teenagers scream and dive out of the way. It was absolute chaos. The DJ tried to keep playing music, but even he gave up when Carl knocked over the refreshment table and sent a bowl of punch flying across the room. Mrs. Hendricks was shouting. People were chasing Carl in all directions. Someone yelled, "The llama is loose," like it was a code red emergency. Jake and I, we were too busy laughing to do anything useful. Eventually, Carl made his way back to the lobby, where the hotel staff somehow wrangled him into a service elevator. I have no idea how they managed that, but by the time we caught up with him, he was standing calmly in the elevator, looking very pleased with himself. Hotel security wasn't as amused. Jake's cousin had to come pick Carl up, and we were both kicked out of prom. The principal gave us a long lecture about inappropriate behavior and endangering school property, but honestly, it was worth every second. Carl the llama became a school legend. To this day, people still talk about the llama prom like it was some kind of mythical event. There are even rumors that the hotel had to replace the carpet because of the poop incident, though I can't confirm that. As for Jake and me, we didn't win prom king, but we won something better, immortality. And every time I see a llama, I think that's Carl, the real MVP. When I was 16, I got my first taste of freedom. My parents let me stay home alone for a whole weekend. No babysitters, no neighbors checking in. Just me, the house, and 2 glorious days of doing absolutely nothing responsible. For a teenage introvert, it felt like heaven. My only plan was to binge watch TV, eat cereal straight from the box, and sleep until noon. The first night was perfect. I stayed up way too late watching horror movies, which in hindsight was probably a bad idea, but it didn't feel that way at the time. It was the middle of summer, and we lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Lock the doors, keep the lights on. What's there to worry about, right? It was around 2 a.m. when I finally decided to drag myself to bed. I switched off the TV and made the rounds, checking that the front door was locked and all the windows were shut. I remember standing by the big sliding glass door in the living room for a moment, looking out at the backyard. The moonlight made the garden look peaceful, almost surreal, like a scene from a dream. Satisfied that everything was secure, I turned off the lights and went upstairs to my room. I was almost asleep when I heard it, a soft tap 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 against the glass downstairs. At first, I thought I had imagined it. I told myself it was probably just the wind, brushing a tree branch against the house. Nothing to freak out about. But then it came again, more deliberate this time. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, my heart beating a little faster. The sound was faint but distinct, and it was coming from the sliding door in the living room. I tried to shake off the unease crawling up my spine. It's nothing I thought, just a bird or a raccoon or something. But a small, paranoid part of me whispered, "Go check, just to be sure." I wish I hadn't listened to that voice. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make any noise. The house felt too quiet now, The kind of silence that makes your ears strain for the smallest sound. I tiptoed down the stairs, my bare feet cold against the wooden steps. When I reached the bottom, I peeked around the corner into the living room. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The room was dark except for the pale blue glow of the moon filtering in through the glass door. I stood there for a moment, waiting, listening, and then just as I was about to turn around and go back upstairs, I saw it. A face, pressed against the glass, just inches away, staring right at me. I can't describe the feeling that shot through me in that moment. It was like every muscle in my body locked up at once. I couldn't scream. I couldn't run. All I could do was stand there, frozen in place, as this stranger, this man, stared at me through the glass with a grin that made my blood run cold. His forehead was pressed so hard against the glass that it flattened, and his eyes, they weren't just looking at me. They were boring into me, like he could see every fear, every nightmare I'd ever had. His smile stretched too wide, almost as if it hurt him to keep it that way, but he didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. He lifted one finger and tapped on the glass, the sound sharp and deliberate. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Somehow, I forced myself to move, just a small step back, hoping that if I slipped out of sight, he would go away. But the moment I moved, his head tilted, following my every shift. His grin widened, as if he found my fear amusing. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling as I reached for the phone in my pocket. My mind raced, call the police, lock the doors, run. Just as I unlocked my phone, I saw him move. He didn't run or walk away. He just melted into the shadows, like a ghost slipping into the night. 1 second he was there, grinning at me through the glass, and the next he was gone. I sprinted upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, every nerve on edge. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher what had happened. She stayed on the line with me while I waited, every minute stretching out into what felt like hours. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. It was as if the man had never been there at all. But he had been. I know he had. For the rest of the night, I sat on my bed with a baseball bat clutched in my hands, every creak of the house sending my heart into overdrive. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. The next morning, when my parents came home, I told them everything. They brushed it off, said it was probably just some neighborhood kid playing a prank. I wanted to believe that. God, I really did. But deep down, I knew the truth. That wasn't a prank. And it didn't end there. For weeks after that night, strange things started happening. Small things at first. A door left open when I knew I had closed it. Items moved from where I left them. Lights flickering without explanation. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, the aftermath of a bad scare. But then, one night, I found a message scratched into the wood of the sliding door. Just one word, hello. That's when I knew he wasn't done with me, and I still don't know if he ever will be. It started with a gut feeling. I can't explain it any other way. It just hit me one day out of nowhere. We were sitting on the couch, watching some crime documentary, and everything looked normal on the outside. His arm was around me, my feet were tucked under his leg, the dog was snoring on the carpet. But still something felt off, like I was standing in the middle of a room that looked identical to my home, but the walls were just a little too close, the furniture just a bit out of place. I ignored it, told myself I was being ridiculous. We'd been together for 4 years. We had shared dreams, Sunday morning breakfasts, matching coffee mugs with cheesy inscriptions. I'm her cup of tea. Cheating wasn't in the realm of possibility. Or at least, that's what I thought. But then the small things started adding up. The first thing I noticed was how distracted he became. He'd always been present, annoyingly so. Sometimes, when we were together, he was there. Like, if I texted him, I'd have a reply before I even put my phone down. If I needed something, he'd show up with it, no questions asked. But lately he was a ghost. I'd ask a question, and he'd respond 5 minutes later, after I'd already repeated myself 3 times. If I talked to him while he was on his phone, he'd give those half-hearted MMHM responses that don't mean anything. Once, I told him I was thinking about chopping off all my hair and dyeing it green, just to see if he was listening. He didn't even blink. Then there was the texting. Constant texting. I thought I was being paranoid. Everyone's on their phone these days, right? But it was the way he was on it. The way he'd tilt the screen away when I walked by. The way he'd angle himself on the couch, always with his back to me, phone in hand. I caught him smiling at his screen once. One of those soft smiles you give when someone you like texts you something cute. When I asked him what was so funny, he locked his phone with a quick flick of his thumb and said, "Oh, just a meme." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But that little knot in my stomach kept tightening. It got worse from there. He started going out more often, work happy hours, old friends from college, solo coffee runs. Every time I asked if I could come along, he'd say, "Next time," or "It's just a quick thing, won't be fun for you." The lies were subtle at first, barely noticeable. I wanted to believe he was just busy, just tired. Maybe he was going through something. Then one night he came home late, really late. He told me he'd gone out for drinks with some coworkers, but he didn't smell like alcohol. In fact, he smelled like peppermint gum and a scent I couldn't quite place. Something floral and unfamiliar. I asked him if everything was okay, and he snapped at me. Not a full-blown fight, just a quick, sharp, "I'm tired, okay? Can we not do this tonight?" It stung, but I let it go. I didn't want to be that girlfriend. The nagging, suspicious one who accuses her partner of cheating just because they had a long day. But the next morning, while he was in the shower, I picked up his jeans from the floor to toss them in the laundry basket. That's when I felt it. Something in the pocket. It was a receipt from a restaurant. 2 entrees, 2 cocktails, and a dessert at a place he'd told me he hated. My heart dropped. When he came out of the bathroom, I held the receipt up without saying a word. His face did that thing. A flicker of panic, so quick that if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. "I met up with an old friend," he said, drying his hair with a towel. "It was last minute. Didn't think it was a big deal." "Who?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "Kelly. You've met her. She was at the wedding last summer." I hadn't met any Kelly at any wedding. The conversation ended there, at least on the surface. But inside me, something cracked open. That was when I knew. Maybe not the full truth, but enough of it. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more and more things that didn't add up. He'd leave for work events, but never have photos or stories to share afterward. His credit card bill had charges at places I'd never heard of: bars, spas, even a flower shop. When I asked about it, he said they were business-related. But since when did business meetings happen at spas? Then one night I did the thing I promised myself I'd never do. I went through his phone. It took me all of 5 minutes to find the messages. There was no denying it. He wasn't just talking to someone else. He was in love with her. The texts weren't explicit. They were worse. They were sweet. Long conversations about books, inside jokes, shared memories from their weekends together. He told her things he hadn't told me in months. How tired he was, how much he missed her when they were apart, how he couldn't wait to see her again. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, phone in hand, reading every word like it was a dagger aimed at my heart. When he came home that night, I didn't confront him right away. I needed a moment to collect myself, to figure out what to do next. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of our relationship, knowing I had to jump but terrified of what came after. He walked in, smiled like nothing was wrong, and kissed my forehead. "Hey babe," he said, kicking off his shoes. "How was your day?" I looked up at him, the words bubbling in my throat, ready to burst. But instead of anger, all I felt was exhaustion. I was so tired of pretending everything was okay. "How long?" I whispered. His smile faltered. "What? How long have you been seeing her?" The color drained from his face. For a second, he looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, panicked, desperate, searching for a way out. But then, just like that, his expression hardened. "You went through my phone?" he asked, voice sharp with disbelief. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "You invaded my privacy," he said, shaking his head like I was the one who had broken something sacred. I almost laughed. Privacy? Was that really what we were going to argue about? Not the lies, not the betrayal. Just the fact that I'd found out? I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "I'm done," I said, grabbing my coat from the hook by the door. "Wait," he called after me, panic creeping back into his voice. "Let's talk about this. Please." I shook my head. There's nothing left to talk about. And just like that, I walked out. The truth is, the hardest part wasn't leaving him. It was realizing that the person I thought I knew, the person I loved, never really existed. I wasn't always like this. Jaded? I used to believe in the whole fairy tale. Soulmates, true love, the idea that if you just kept putting yourself out there, eventually you'd find your person. I bought into the dream with my whole heart, even after it got stomped on a few times. But somewhere along the way, all that hope slipped through my fingers like sand. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't just one big, dramatic heartbreak that did me in. It was the little ones, the everyday disappointments, the slow, creeping exhaustion of trying to build something with people who treated love like it was a hobby instead of a commitment. The beginning is always the best part, isn't it? That rush of adrenaline when someone new enters your life, and suddenly everything feels a little brighter, a little more exciting. I met Kyle in one of those moments, at a wedding of all places. A mutual friend sat us at the same table, probably hoping to play matchmaker, and by the end of the night, we were laughing like old friends. I'll admit, I was smitten from the start. He was witty in a way that wasn't forced, and he had this easygoing charm that made me feel like I could breathe around him. No pretenses, no trying to impress. Just comfortable. He asked for my number before the night ended, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of excitement. The kind of excitement you only get when you think, maybe this one will be different. And for a while, it was different. Kyle wasn't the guy who played games. He called when he said he would, showed up when he promised, and made plans instead of leaving me guessing. He did little things, like bringing my favorite coffee when I mentioned I'd had a rough day, or texting me just to say good morning. Stuff that feels rare these days, like finding a $20 bill in an old jacket pocket. We settled into a rhythm quickly. Weekend brunches, lazy afternoons watching movies, late night talks about life, and everything in between. It was good, it was easy, and I thought, finally, someone who gets it, someone who wants the same things I do. But here's the thing no one tells you about relationships. Sometimes they don't end with a bang. Sometimes they end with a whisper. It started small, the way these things always do. A canceled date here, a missed phone call there. Sorry, work's been crazy. Sorry, I'm just really tired tonight. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have lives, right? We all get busy. But then the excuses started stacking up. Weeks would go by without seeing each other. Conversations that used to flow so naturally started feeling forced, like we were both trying to keep the spark alive, but not really sure how to do it anymore. I tried to be patient. I told myself relationships take work, that maybe Kyle was just going through a rough patch. I asked him if everything was okay, if there was anything I could do to help. He always said the same thing. Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired. I believed him, because I wanted to believe him. But the truth is, people don't just get tired. Not like that. Not from things they care about. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic moment where everything came crashing down, a big fight, a tearful goodbye, something I could point to and say that's when it all fell apart. But there wasn't. It just faded, like a song playing in the background that slowly gets quieter until you barely notice it's gone. The last time I saw Kyle, we had dinner at my place. I cooked, we drank wine, and we talked about nothing in particular. For a moment, things felt normal again, comfortable, like they used to. But as the night wore on, I could feel the distance between us, this invisible wall that hadn't been there before. When he left, he kissed me on the forehead and said, "Talk to you soon." I knew I wouldn't hear from him again, and I was right. He didn't ghost me exactly. There was no cold, sudden silence. He just faded out. The texts became fewer and further between. The calls stopped altogether, and eventually I stopped trying, because what's the point? You can't force someone to care. That's the part that hurts the most, I think. Not the end itself, but the way people can drift out of your life without even realizing they're leaving. It makes you feel like you're not worth holding on to, like you were just a placeholder in someone else's story until they found something better. I spent a long time after that trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Was I too much? Not enough? Should I have been more patient? More understanding? But at some point, I realized that it wasn't about me. It was never about me. Some people just aren't built to stay. These days, I find myself hesitating when someone new comes along. I overthink every text, every gesture, wondering if I'm setting myself up for another slow-motion heartbreak. It's hard to be excited about someone when you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. And the worst part? I'm not even mad anymore. I don't have the energy for anger. I just feel tired. Tired of trying. Tired of hoping. Tired of believing that things could be different. Only to be reminded, time and time again, that they're not. People tell me I should take a break from dating, focus on myself for a while. And I have. But the truth is, I don't know if I want to go back. Because how do you keep putting yourself out there when every connection feels like a gamble? When every, hey, how are you, could be the start of something beautiful, or just another reminder that you're replaceable. I guess that's what ruined dating for me in the end. Not the bad dates or the failed relationships, but the slow erosion of hope. I used to think love was something magical, something worth chasing no matter how many times you fell. But now I'm not so sure. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. It all started because I didn't feel like doing the responsible thing and going home early. You know those nights when you tell yourself, just one drink, maybe two, and then I'm out of here like a responsible adult? Yeah, that was the plan. But plans and tequila have never been friends. And that night was no exception. I was out with my coworker Jake, who insisted we hit this speakeasy that apparently only cool people knew about. Honestly, I wasn't even in the mood to socialize, but something about the way the night felt. Warm breeze, good playlist, Jake smug, I know you'll have fun, made me say yes. I walked in telling myself, no big moves tonight. Just drinks, no weird decisions. Of course, that's exactly when weird decisions happen. Enter Mia. She was standing at the bar wearing the kind of confidence that only people who don't care what anyone thinks can pull off. She was gorgeous. Not in the unattainable magazine cover way, but in that effortlessly cool, thrift store chic way that makes you feel like you're looking at someone who knows all the indie bands before they go mainstream. We locked eyes for a split second, and suddenly I wasn't tired anymore. I didn't even have a game plan, just a wild urge to talk to her. I looked at Jake, who gave me the world's most obvious wingman nod, and before I could think too hard about it, I walked over and introduced myself. Do you always make entrances this smooth? Or is it just a Thursday night thing? She asked with a grin. And just like that, I was hooked. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Books, travel stories, even the embarrassing confession that I still watch old Friends episodes when I'm stressed. She laughed at all the right moments, touched my arm just enough to make my heart race. And by the end of the second round of drinks, I knew exactly where this was heading. When she leaned in close and whispered, "Want to get out of here?" I felt like I just won the lottery. We ended up at her place, a cute little apartment that smelled like vanilla candles and mystery. We stumbled inside, leaving a trail of shoes and jackets behind us, and for the next few hours, I was convinced I'd cracked the code to happiness. No responsibilities, no commitments, just a gorgeous woman and the kind of chemistry they write steamy romance novels about. It was perfect, until it wasn't. I woke up around 6 a.m., disoriented and tangled in her sheets. For a brief, blissful moment, I forgot where I was and thought, this is nice. And then reality came crashing in. I glanced over at Mia, who was still asleep, her hair a wild mess, and realized with a sinking feeling, oh no, this is more than I bargained for. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about hookups. Sometimes they make you question your entire life philosophy. I should have slipped out quietly, made a smooth exit like a one-night stand pro. But instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by a sudden urge to, I don't know, make her pancakes or something. Which is insane, right? Because pancakes are a gateway to emotions, and emotions have no place in casual hookups. Everyone knows that, and yet, there I was, imagining Sunday mornings with coffee and inside jokes, wondering what kind of music she liked to play when she cleaned her apartment. It was ridiculous, but it didn't feel ridiculous. It felt nice. The universe, however, was not about to let me enjoy my existential crisis in peace. Right then, Mia stirred, opened one eye, and gave me the laziest, sexiest grin I'd ever seen. "Morning," she murmured, stretching like a cat. "You okay?" Yeah, I lied because saying, actually, I think I might be rethinking all my life choices didn't seem like the right vibe. We talked for a bit. Light stuff, nothing serious. She offered me coffee, which I accepted because apparently I'm a masochist who enjoys making things complicated for myself. As we sat on her couch, sipping our coffees in comfortable silence, I found myself wanting to stay longer. I wanted to know more about her, like why she had a collection of postcards pinned to her fridge, or what made her decide to adopt the grumpy black cat curled up in the corner. And that's when I knew I was in trouble. This wasn't just about Mia. It was about the fact that for the first time in years, I wanted more than just a fleeting connection. I thought I'd signed up for a simple, no-strings-attached night of fun, but what I got instead was a giant neon sign flashing. You're not built for this casual stuff anymore, dude. When it was finally time to leave, I felt this weird mix of relief and regret. I didn't want to outstay my welcome, but I also didn't want to leave. It was the kind of moment that makes you realize how messy feelings can be, even when you try your hardest to avoid them. As I stood in the doorway, trying to think of a cool way to say goodbye, Mia smiled and said, "This was fun. No pressure or anything, but if you ever want to hang out again, just let me know." And just like that, she gave me an out, a way to walk away without any guilt, without any messy follow-ups. It was the perfect ending to a perfect night. But instead of feeling relieved, I felt disappointed. Not in her, but in myself. Because deep down, I knew I didn't just want another night. I wanted something more, something real, something meaningful. And pretending otherwise wasn't going to work for me anymore. I smiled, gave her a quick hug, and said, "Yeah, I'll text you." Spoiler alert, I didn't text her. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that whatever I was looking for, I wasn't going to find it in another casual fling. That night taught me something I didn't expect. Casual sex is great, until it's not. And once it stops being great, no amount of tequila or charming strangers can fill the gap that's left behind. So, I made a promise to myself that morning. No more pretending. No more fun nights that leave me feeling emptier than when I started. It's time to stop chasing thrills and start looking for something real. And who knows? Maybe next time, I'll find it. Until then, I'll just try to avoid bars with too much tequila. You know that old cliche about how nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m.? Yeah, turns out it's true. Ethan and I had been best friends for 12 years. We met in middle school when he traded me half his sandwich for my fruit snacks. And from that moment on, we were inseparable. There were sleepovers, stupid inside jokes, long nights spent playing video games, and a million times people asked if we were dating. No, we'd always say, he's like my brother, or she's basically family. The idea of anything romantic between us felt absurd. Ethan was the guy who'd seen me cry over high school crushes, knew how weird I got during finals, and once held my hair back when I puked after drinking 4 shots of vodka at a party freshman year. Romance wasn't even on the radar. Until it was, it started with his breakup. Ethan had been dating this girl, Amanda, for 2 years, and when she dumped him, it hit him hard. For weeks, he was a wreck, calling me late at night to vent, binge-watching sad movies, even texting her when he knew he shouldn't. I tried to be supportive, but honestly, it was exhausting. I knew Amanda was bad for him, and I hated seeing him spiral. So one night, after about an hour of listening to him rehash the same conversation about what went wrong, I invited him over. "I'm getting you drunk," I told him. "You need to forget about her for one night." He showed up at my place with a bottle of whiskey and the saddest expression I'd ever seen. We sat on my couch, drinking straight from the bottle, swapping stories about our terrible love lives. Somewhere between the 3rd and 4th shots, I told him, "You know, Amanda was an idiot. If I were her, I'd never have let you go." Ethan gave me this lopsided grin, the kind he always got when he was drunk, and said, "Yeah, maybe you should have dated me instead." I laughed. "Oh, please. We'd kill each other." But then he leaned in, just a little, and his smile softened. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe we'd be good together." I should have laughed it off. I should have made a joke or changed the subject. But instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in 12 years, I noticed how blue his eyes were. How his hair always fell in his face at just the right angle. How close he was, and how easy it would be to just... And then, without thinking, I kissed him. It was like flipping a switch. 1 second, we were friends, and the next, we were all hands and lips, and years of unspoken tension crashing down on us. We barely made it to my bedroom before clothes started flying. And for the first time in forever, my brain shut off. No overthinking, no second guessing. Just Ethan and me, tangled in each other like this was something we'd been waiting for all along. It was amazing and terrifying. And when it was over and we were lying there in the dark, all I could think was, what the hell did we just do? Are we okay? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ethan turned to me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Yeah, he said, but it sounded more like a question than an answer. The next morning was awkward, to say the least. We tried to act normal. He made coffee, I scrambled some eggs, but the usual ease between us was gone. Every glance felt loaded with unspoken questions. Every silence stretched too long. And when he left, giving me a weird half-hug at the door, I knew things had changed. We didn't talk for a few days after that. I told myself it was fine. We were both just processing, but the longer the silence stretched, the more anxious I got. What if I'd ruined everything? What if 12 years of friendship had just gone up in flames because of one drunken mistake? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him, "We need to talk." He came over that night, looking just as nervous as I felt. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, neither of us knowing how to start. Finally, I blurted out, "So, about the other night." Ethan winced, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that." We sat there in awkward silence for a moment before he said, "Look, I think we both know it was a mistake." My heart sank. I nodded, trying to ignore the sudden lump in my throat. "Yeah, totally. Just a drunk thing." He gave me a small, relieved smile. "Exactly. No big deal, right?" "Right," I echoed, forcing a smile of my own. But inside, I felt like I was crumbling. We tried to go back to normal after that. We really did, but it was like trying to unring a bell. Every time we hung out, there was this tension between us, this heavy, unspoken thing that neither of us knew how to deal with. And the worst part? I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about how right it had felt, even though I knew it was wrong. Things came to a head a few weeks later at a party. Ethan was there, of course, but so was this girl, a tall, gorgeous brunette who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. They were flirting, laughing, and for the first time in my life, I felt jealous. I tried to play it cool, but Ethan saw right through me. After the party, he pulled me aside. "Are you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I snapped. "No, Ethan, I'm not okay. I've been a mess ever since that night, and seeing you with her just made it worse." He looked stunned, like he hadn't expected me to admit it out loud. "I didn't know you felt like that," he said quietly. "Yeah, well, neither did I." We stood there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. Finally, Ethan took a step closer, his expression soft. "Look," he said, "I don't know what this is or where it's going, but I know I don't want to lose you." Tears welled in my eyes, and I hated myself for it. "Me neither." He smiled then, just a small, hopeful smile. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd be okay. It's been 6 months since that conversation. We're still figuring things out, navigating the weird, messy transition from friends to whatever this is. But it's good, better than I expected. And you know what? If nothing else, I've learned one thing. Sometimes the best things in life come from the messiest beginnings. It started with a plant. A little snake plant in a terracotta pot that I didn't buy, didn't ask for, and didn't want. It just showed up on my desk one Monday morning, sitting there like it owned the place. A sticky note on the pot read, "For good vibes, HR smiling face with smiling eyes. Good vibes? From a plant? Right. Like a couple of spiky green leaves were going to offset my inbox. Overdue reports, and the soul-crushing knowledge that I'd spent 3 years in this office with nothing to show for it, but a chair that squeaked every time I shifted. I stared at it for a while, wondering what exactly HR thought they were fixing. We didn't need plants. We needed fewer meetings and higher salaries. But there it was, beaming its little green vibes at me like a passive-aggressive therapist. I tried to ignore it, shoved it to the far corner of my desk, and told myself it wasn't my problem. I had enough to deal with, like the monthly sales report, which was already late, and the fact that my manager, Claire, kept sending gentle reminders that felt anything but gentle. The plant could vibe all it wanted. I wasn't participating, but it just sat there, quietly thriving looking greener and healthier by the day. I didn't water it. Not once. In fact, I forgot about it entirely until a couple of weeks later when I noticed it again, still alive, still green, and somehow bigger. I nudged one of the leaves with a pen, half expecting it to shrivel on the spot, but it just stood tall, stubbornly healthy. That's when I felt it, an absurd, misplaced sense of guilt. It was the weirdest thing. I hadn't asked for this plant, but now that it was here, I felt responsible for it. Like if it died, it would somehow reflect on me. He can't even keep a plant alive. No wonder he's falling behind on deadlines. So I gave in. I poured a little water into the pot, trying not to care too much. It wasn't a big deal, I told myself. Just a splash of water. But the next day, I caught myself glancing at it during a meeting, checking to see if the leaves looked a little shinier. By the end of the week, I'd Googled how to care for a snake plant. Turns out they're hard to kill, which was reassuring. Low maintenance, the article said perfect for beginners. I told myself that meant I wouldn't have to think about it again for at least a month. But I did think about it, more than I should have. It became a weird little ritual. Every few days, I'd water it, wipe the dust off its leaves, or tilt the pot to make sure it got enough sunlight from the window. I even gave it a name, Spike, which was ridiculous, but somehow it felt right. And without meaning to, I started talking to it. Just small things, muttering under my breath while scrolling through emails. Can you believe this crap, Spike? Or guess we're both stuck here another day? Huh, buddy? It wasn't like I expected it to answer. It was just nice. A little habit that made the long afternoons feel a bit less endless. Then, one day, Claire stopped by my desk. She leaned on the partition wall with that overly cheerful smile managers use when they're about to ruin your day. Got a minute? I knew what that meant. She didn't need to say it. I followed her to one of the little glass-walled conference rooms where uncomfortable conversations go to die. She motioned for me to sit, then closed the door behind her. So, she began, flipping through a folder like it contained state secrets. We need to talk about your performance. There it was, the talk. The one every burnout employee fears but sees coming a mile away. She launched into it. Missed deadlines, inconsistent work, failure to meet expectations. I nodded along, feeling the weight of every word sink into my shoulders. She wasn't wrong. I'd been dragging myself through the days, doing the bare minimum to get by. When she finally asked, "What's going on with you?" I didn't have a good answer. I could have told her the truth, that I was tired, that every day felt like wading through quicksand, that I wasn't even sure why I got out of bed most mornings. But I knew that wasn't what she wanted to hear. "I'll do better," I mumbled instead, because that's what you say when there's nothing else left. She gave me a tight smile. "I know you will." I walked back to my desk, feeling drained and defeated. It wasn't that I cared so much about the job. It was just the sinking realization that I'd let everything slide, and now there was no way to climb back up. I sat down, stared at my screen for a long time, and then, without thinking, I turned to Spike. "Well," I said quietly, "that could have gone worse, right?" The plant, as usual, offered no reply. But for some reason, it made me feel a little better. That's when I noticed something. One of the leaves, one of the big ones near the top, had started to droop. Just a little. It was stupid, really. Just one leaf. But it felt like a warning. You let things slide, and even the unkillable stuff starts to give up. I sat there, staring at the leaf, feeling the weirdest mix of emotions. I knew it was just a plant, a stupid little office plant, but it felt like it was holding up a mirror, showing me exactly what I didn't want to see. The cracks forming, the small signs of neglect, the slow unraveling that happens when you stop trying. I watered it immediately, carefully pouring just enough to soak the soil. Then I sat back, waiting for a miracle. The thing is, plants don't bounce back right away. You can't just dump water on them and expect them to perk up in 5 minutes. It takes time, and care, and patience. 3 things I hadn't exactly been practicing lately. But I decided I was going to try. Not just with the plant, with everything. Over the next few weeks, I made small changes. Nothing big, nothing dramatic. I set reminders on my phone to water Spike every Monday. I started responding to emails right when I got them, instead of letting them pile up. I even bought a new notebook, one of those fancy ones with the thick paper, just to make a list of things I wanted to accomplish each day. Most of the items were small, stuff like clear out inbox or eat something that isn't a vending machine snack. But crossing them off felt good. It felt like progress, and little by little things started to shift. I wasn't suddenly the perfect employee, and I didn't magically love my job. But I felt better, lighter somehow, like I'd stopped waiting for everything to fall apart and started trying to hold things together, even if it was just one tiny leaf at a time. Spike perked up too. The drooping leaf straightened out, and new shoots began to poke through the soil. I found myself weirdly proud, like I'd accomplished something real, even if no one else noticed. One day, Claire walked by my desk and gave me a nod. Not a smile, just a subtle nod like she'd noticed the change but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I nodded back, and just like that, the day didn't feel quite so heavy. Spike sat there, green and steady, a little reminder that some things don't need to be perfect. They just need attention. And that, I realized, was enough. Sometimes, all it takes is keeping something alive, even if it's just a plant. You ever have one of those moments where you think, I've got this, and life immediately responds with, no, you don't? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me one summer afternoon when I decided to fix my kitchen light switch. Spoiler alert. I almost became a crispy corpse over a $5 electrical outlet. It started like this. One of the switches in the kitchen had been acting up for months. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I'd flick it on, and the lights would strobe like a rave party from the 90s. My wife kept saying, just call an electrician. But, of course, I thought, why pay someone for something so simple? I mean, I've changed light bulbs. How much harder could a switch be, right? So, one lazy Saturday, armed with a screwdriver and an absolutely undeserved sense of confidence, I decided it was time to channel my inner handyman. I did the responsible thing and Googled how to replace a light switch. Watched a couple of YouTube tutorials featuring dudes in cargo shorts who looked like they knew what they were doing. Easy peasy. Now, the instructions said, make sure you turn off the power at the breaker. But I thought, do I really need to? It's just one switch. I figured as long as I didn't touch both wires at the same time, I'd be fine. Like, electricity can't hurt you if you outsmart it, right? Wrong. So there I was, standing on a wobbly kitchen chair, because why use a ladder when you can risk death by bad furniture? And unscrewing the old switch. Everything seemed fine at first. No sparks, no extraña noises. I thought to myself, I was born for this. Then I pulled the switch out of the wall, and that's when things started to go downhill fast. Now, let me tell you something they don't really emphasize in those DIY videos. Electrical wires don't care how good your intentions are. They are unforgiving. One tiny slip, and they'll send you to meet your ancestors. I was holding the switch in one hand and trying to wiggle the wires loose when bam, my thumb brushed against the live wire. The shock hit me like a sledgehammer wrapped in lightning. I felt it travel through my arm, across my chest, and down to my toes. Every muscle in my body clenched at once. I couldn't scream because my jaw locked up like I was biting into a brick. For a second, it felt like my soul tried to exit my body, but then decided, nah, not today. And here's the wild part. Time slowed down. I swear I had a full conversation with myself in that split second. Is this how it ends? I thought. Over a light switch? This is so dumb. My tombstone's going to say, killed by overconfidence. I even imagined my wife explaining it to people at the funeral. Yeah, he thought he was an electrician. Turns out he was just an idiot. Then, just as quickly as it started, the current released me. I stumbled backward off the chair, crashing into the kitchen counter and knocking over everything in my path. Salt shaker, paper towels, half a loaf of bread. The whole kitchen turned into a disaster zone. I sat there on the floor, heart racing, limbs twitching, feeling like I'd just gone 12 rounds with Zeus himself. The smell of singed hair filled the room, and it took me a moment to realize that the hair on my arm was lightly toasted. I stared at my hand in disbelief, half expecting to see it glowing like Iron Man's repulsor. Luckily, no burns, just a tingling sensation that made me feel like I was vibrating at a molecular level. That's when my wife walked into the kitchen, saw me sprawled on the floor with the switch dangling from the wall, and said, "Did you turn off the power first?" I gave her the most sheepish look I could muster. I thought about it. She sighed the kind of sigh that married people reserve for moments when their partner does something truly boneheaded. I told you to call an electrician. Yeah, I muttered, still lying on the floor like a crime scene outline. I had it under control. She didn't even respond. Just shook her head, walked over to the breaker box, and flipped the right switch. The lights in the kitchen went dark, and the buzzing in my body finally stopped. "Why didn't you do that before?" she asked, giving me the kind of look you'd give a toddler who just colored on the walls with permanent marker. I didn't have a good answer. Honestly, I think my brain was still rebooting from the shock. I just nodded, got up from the floor, and promised her, and the universe, that I'd never mess with electrical stuff again. Since that day, I've developed a deep respect for anything involving wires, circuits, or electricity. I don't care if it's changing a light switch, installing a ceiling fan, or plugging in the Wi-Fi router. If it even looks like it could shock me, I'm calling a professional. And here's the thing, I got lucky. That shock could have stopped my heart or thrown me hard enough to crack my head open. All it takes is one tiny mistake, one little lapse in judgment, and suddenly you're a cautionary tale for other DIY enthusiasts. Now, every time I hear someone say, "Oh, I'll just fix it myself," I get flashbacks of that jolt running through my body. I want to grab them by the shoulders and yell, "No! Hire an electrician. Live to see another day." Because let me tell you, there is nothing heroic about getting electrocuted. It doesn't make you a genius or a handyman. It just makes you a dumbass with fried nerves and a new fear of light switches. So yeah, the next time you think about fixing something electrical yourself, do yourself a favor. Put the screwdriver down, call an expert, and stay alive. Your ego isn't worth it. Trust me, I almost became a ghost over a goddamn kitchen light. The diner was exactly how I remembered it, right down to the neon open sign flickering like it was on its last leg. I hadn't been here in years, but everything inside felt frozen in time. The red vinyl booths, the hum of the coffee machine, the faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air. I slid into a booth by the window and tried to ignore the ache in my chest. Places like this weren't supposed to change. They were supposed to stay exactly the same, like a lighthouse for people drifting too far off course. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that said Sharon shuffled over to take my order. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." She filled the cup without enthusiasm, sloshing a little onto the table. I didn't mind. I wasn't here for the coffee. I stared out the window as the rain tapped lightly against the glass. Across the street, the gas station I used to work at was still standing, though the lights were dim, and the pumps looked older than I remembered. I wondered if old Daryl still worked there. Probably not. It felt like a lifetime ago, and maybe it was. The bell above the diner door jingled, and a man walked in, shaking water from his jacket. I knew it was Kevin before I even turned around. He spotted me right away, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, followed by something I couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe, or regret. "Thought that was you," he said, sliding into the booth across from me without asking. "Didn't think I'd ever see you back here." Yeah, well, things change. Kevin looked almost the same buzzed haircut, same easy grin that never quite reached his eyes. The only difference was a little more gray in his beard and a heaviness in his posture, like life had pressed just a little harder on him over the years. "You just passing through?" he asked, drumming his fingers on the table. I took a sip of the coffee, bitter and lukewarm. Something like that. Kevin leaned back in the booth, studying me the way people do when they're not sure if they're allowed to ask the questions they really want to. I could tell he wanted to ask why I left, why I never came back, why I didn't answer his messages, why I ghosted everyone like cutting ties would fix everything. But he didn't. He just gave me a lopsided grin, the same one that used to get him out of trouble with teachers and girlfriends alike. "Place hasn't changed much, huh?" he said, glancing around the diner. "No." We fell into a familiar silence, the kind that settles between old friends who've spent too much time apart but still know the rhythm of each other's company. Sharon shuffled back to the table, refilling my coffee and offering Kevin a cup without asking if he wanted one. He gave her a polite nod, then turned his attention back to me. "So," he said, blowing on his coffee, "you seeing anyone these days?" It was an innocent question, one people ask when they're trying to bridge the gap between past and present. But it hit harder than I expected. "No," I said, trying not to let the answer sting as much as it did. Kevin nodded, like that made sense to him. "Yeah, same here. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. There was a time when we used to tell each other everything. Back when life felt wide open, and the future was something we believed we could shape however we wanted. We'd sit on the hood of Kevin's truck, watching the stars blur into the night sky, and talk about all the places we'd go. But then life happened, and we drifted the way people do when they start to realize that dreams don't pay rent or fix broken things. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. Thought it would be easier if I just disappeared. Turns out, it wasn't easier for anyone. You staying long? Kevin asked after a while. Not sure yet. He nodded slowly, swirling the coffee in his cup. You know, I always thought you'd do something big. Go somewhere cool. Make a name for yourself. I laughed, but it came out more like a cough. Yeah, well, that didn't exactly pan out. Yeah, he said softly. Same here. We sat there for a while, the rain outside growing heavier, the sound of it tapping against the window like a heartbeat. There was a time when I thought conversations like this were pointless, just two people trying to patch up things that couldn't be fixed. But sitting here with Kevin, in this old diner that hadn't changed one bit, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit before. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things. Maybe it was about showing up, even when you didn't know how to. After a while, Kevin glanced at the clock on the wall and let out a low sigh. I should probably get going. Work in the morning. Yeah, I said, though I wasn't sure where I was going to go. He slid out of the booth, grabbing his jacket from the seat. It was good seeing you, though. Really? Yeah, you too. Kevin hesitated for a moment, like there was something else he wanted to say, but couldn't quite find the words. Instead, he gave me a quick nod and headed for the door. The bell jingled as it swung shut behind him, leaving me alone with the hum of the coffee machine and the sound of rain hitting the glass. I sat there a little longer, stirring my coffee and thinking about all the things we never said. When I finally got up to leave, Sharon gave me a tired smile as I paid the bill. See you around, she said, though I wasn't sure if she meant it. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the air smelled like wet pavement and pine. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, staring at the neon sign as it buzzed faintly in the darkness. I wasn't sure where I was going next, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like a bad thing. I started walking, the road stretching out ahead of me like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. The rain tapped lightly on my shoulders and I let it. Maybe I'd leave again, or maybe this time I'd stay. Either way, I was here now, and for tonight, that was enough. About 5 years ago, I took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse. It wasn't anything fancy, just some big, empty building on the edge of an industrial district mostly used for storage. The pay wasn't great, but I needed the money and I figured it would be easy. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my main job was to walk the perimeter a few times, make sure nobody was sneaking in, and watch a few monitors in the security booth. The first couple of weeks went by uneventfully. I'd walk around the lot, punch the clock at the checkpoint stations, and spend the rest of the night watching grainy surveillance footage. I liked the quiet, actually. It gave me a chance to listen to podcasts and catch up on stuff I never had time for. But around my third week on the job, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. I'd be doing my rounds, and I'd get this strange sense that someone was watching me. I'd scan the lot, expecting to see a stray dog or maybe a homeless guy wandering through the area, but I never saw anything. The place was always empty. Too empty. I told myself it was just a night shift messing with my head. Everyone says weird stuff happens when you're up all night alone, right? I didn't think much of it. Then one night around 2 a.m., I was sitting in the security booth half listening to a podcast when I saw something flicker on one of the monitors. A figure, just for a second, moving along the side of the building. I straightened up and rewound the footage, heart thudding in my chest. But when I replayed it, there was nothing. Just an empty parking lot, dimly lit by a flickering streetlight. I stared at the screen for a long time, convinced I'd seen something. But after a few minutes, I told myself it must have been a glitch or a shadow from a passing car. I tried to shake it off, but that feeling stuck with me for the rest of the shift. A heavy knot in my gut like something wasn't right. About an hour later, I headed out to do my next round. The night was cold and still, and my footsteps echoed eerily against the concrete. I walked the perimeter, checked the locks on the side gates, and everything seemed normal. But as I rounded the back corner of the building, I froze. The back gate was open. That gate was supposed to stay locked at all times, and I'd personally checked it earlier that night. My pulse spiked, and I reached for my flashlight, shining it into the dark beyond the gate. Nothing, just an empty alleyway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been there. I locked the gate again, telling myself maybe one of the other guards had forgotten to secure it properly during a previous shift. It didn't make sense, but it was the only explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. I finished my round quickly, heart racing the entire time, and headed back to the security booth. As soon as I sat down, the motion detector alarm went off. It wasn't unusual for the alarm to trip. It was sensitive and sometimes picked up small animals or even heavy wind. But this time it was coming from inside the warehouse. I stared at the monitor, watching the red motion sensor icon blink over and over on the blueprint display. My heart started pounding harder, and that gut feeling, the one telling me to get the hell out, was screaming louder than ever. Something was in the building. I grabbed my flashlight and the radio from the desk, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a bird had gotten inside. Maybe one of the roller doors hadn't shut all the way. I didn't want to call it in unless I was sure. Didn't want to look like an idiot on only my third week. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the booth, and walked toward the warehouse entrance. The door groaned as I pushed it open, and the cool air inside hit me like a slap to the face. It was dark in there, only a few emergency lights flickering on the walls. I stood in the doorway for a moment listening. The place was silent, but that feeling, the one I'd had all night, was back stronger than ever. Like I wasn't alone. I clicked on my flashlight and started moving down the aisles between the stacks of pallets and shelves. My footsteps echoed weirdly in the cavernous space, making it hard to tell if I was the only one moving. I kept my flashlight beam steady, scanning every corner, every shadow, but nothing seemed out of place. I was just starting to convince myself that it had been a false alarm when I heard it. A scrape. It was soft but unmistakable, the sound of something being dragged across the concrete floor. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, heart pounding in my throat. For a second, the beam caught something, a figure crouched low, just around the corner of one of the aisles. They moved fast, slipping out of sight before I could get a good look. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty space. "You're not supposed to be here." Silence. I gripped the flashlight tighter, forcing myself to move forward. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around and get the hell out, but I had to see who it was. I turned the corner, sweeping the beam across the floor, and froze. There was a tarp lying on the ground, half unrolled, and sticking out from beneath it was a boot. I stared at it, my mind racing. It looked old, scuffed, and dirty, but it was a boot. A human boot. Someone had been here. Before I could think any further, the motion detector alarm blared again, this time right above me. I jerked my flashlight up just in time to catch a glimpse of someone, or something, climbing the shelves, disappearing into the darkness above. That was it. I was done. I turned on my heel and bolted back toward the exit, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I didn't stop until I was outside, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it with shaking hands. I radioed the main office and told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I could hear the skepticism in their voices. They thought I was imagining things, maybe spooked by working nights for the first time. But I knew what I saw. And what's worse, when the day shift guard came to relieve me that morning, he looked at me with this strange, almost pitying expression. "Didn't anyone tell you?" he asked, lighting a cigarette. "Tell me what?" He exhaled slowly, like he didn't really want to say it. "This place, it's been broken into a couple of times. Homeless folks, mostly. But a few months ago, we found something else." I waited, my skin crawling. They found a body in there. Some drifter, hiding out in the back. Looked like he'd been there for days before anyone noticed. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, numb with disbelief, and walked to my car. I never worked another night shift at that warehouse. Okay, so before I dive into this story, I just want to say, in our defense, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Like in theory, it was genius. No one thought it would end with half the school underwater, the fire department involved, and a janitor threatening to retire on the spot. It all started during our senior year, a few weeks before graduation. Everyone was talking about pulling off the ultimate senior prank, something that would go down in school history. Every year, there was the usual nonsense. People filling hallways with balloons, forking the football field, or swapping classrooms around so the teachers got confused. Boring. We wanted more. Something that would make future seniors say, "Those guys? Yeah, they were legends." Enter Ryan. Now, Ryan was one of those kids who spent most of high school skating on thin ice with the principal. He wasn't quite bad enough to get expelled, but let's just say the guy knew his way around a suspension. One day, Ryan walked into lunch, dropped his tray on the table, and said, "Boys, what if we turn the school into a spa?" At first, we thought he was joking, but then Ryan leaned in, a wild grin spreading across his face. A hot tub in the school. Think about it. We did think about it. And that was the problem, because the longer we thought about it, the more it sounded possible, maybe even awesome. "We'll do it in the science wing," Ryan said, his voice low like we were planning a bank heist. "They've got those giant sinks and floor drains. It's perfect." And just like that, we were all in, because if there's one thing high school seniors are great at, it's committing to catastrophically dumb ideas. The plan was simple, or at least it was simple to a bunch of overconfident teenagers with zero understanding of basic plumbing. After school on Friday, when everyone had cleared out, we'd sneak into the science lab and set everything up. We weren't going to build an actual hot tub. We weren't that ambitious. Instead, we decided to fill one of the lab's deep metal sinks with warm water and bubbles, set up some folding chairs, and boom, instant spa. The best part? We borrowed an inflatable kiddie pool from Ryan's neighbor, just to really sell the vibe. The idea was to inflate the pool and feed it water from the lab sinks using a garden hose Ryan found in his garage. You know, because gravity and hoses are definitely things we totally understood. The whole setup was going to take maybe 30 minutes. In and out, no big deal. At least, that's what we told ourselves. So, Friday rolls around. After school, we waited until the halls were empty, and then we made our move. There were 5 of us: me, Ryan, Jake, our designated lookout, and 2 other guys from the swim team who just wanted to be part of something ridiculous. We snuck into the science lab, dragging in the kiddie pool and the hose, and got to work. The pool inflated without a hitch. Things were looking good. Ryan ran to the sink, cranked the faucet, and threaded the hose onto it. The water started flowing, and we were ecstatic. It was working. Within minutes, the kiddie pool was filling up with warm water. We threw in some bubble bath for good measure, dragged a couple folding chairs over, and popped open cans of soda like we were living the high life. And let me tell you, for about 5 glorious minutes, it was everything we dreamed. 5 high school seniors lounging around a kiddie pool filled with soapy water, inside a science lab, pretending we were at a 5-star resort. We even got Jake to take a video of us, kicking back in our makeshift hot tub while Hotel California played in the background. It was perfect. Then the hose slipped off the sink. At first, we didn't even notice. We were too busy laughing and splashing each other like idiots. But then Ryan looked over and said, is the water supposed to be doing that?" We all turned. Water was spraying everywhere like full-blast fire hose level chaos. The sink faucet was still running, but the hose had come loose, and now it was whipping around like an angry snake, spraying water across the lab. Ryan lunged for it, but slipped on the wet floor and took out one of the folding chairs on his way down. Jake tried to help, but somehow managed to knock over a tray of glass beakers, which shattered on impact. We were officially in disaster mode. Panic set in. I ran to the faucet and tried to turn it off, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was stuck. Meanwhile, the pool was now overflowing with water, spilling suds across the lab floor. The drains? Yeah. Turns out they weren't built to handle a literal tidal wave of soapy water. Who knew? By the time Ryan managed to wrestle the hose back into the sink, it was already too late. Water was spreading across the floor, seeping under the door, and flooding into the hallway. Jake poked his head into the hall and turned back to us, pale as a ghost. "Oh, guys." The water's heading for the library. We were screwed. At this point, we had 2 choices. 1, try to clean up the mess ourselves, or 2, run like hell, and pretend we had nothing to do with it. Naturally, we chose option 2. We grabbed our stuff, bailed out of the science lab, and sprinted down the hall like our lives depended on it. Behind us, the sound of water gushing through the school echoed like a death knell. As we rounded the corner, we saw Mr. Harris, the janitor, standing in the hallway with his mop, staring in disbelief at the mini river flowing toward him. The look on his face said it all. I am too old for this shit. By the time the fire department arrived, yes, the fire department, the entire science wing was under 2 inches of water. The kiddie pool, still sitting proudly in the middle of the lab, filled with bubbles like some cursed monument to our stupidity. They had to shut down the school for 3 days to deal with the water damage. Ryan? He got suspended for a week and banned from walking at graduation. Jake somehow talked his way out of any real punishment, though I'm convinced he bribed someone with those Hotel California videos. As for me, I spent the rest of the year dodging Mr. Harris, who I'm pretty sure still holds a personal grudge. To this day, whenever I see a kiddie pool, I get flashbacks of the look on his face when he saw that flood. But hey, we wanted to leave our mark on the school, and we did. They still call it the Great Hot Tub Incident. And if you listen closely, you can probably hear Mr. Harris cursing our names to this very day. It was supposed to be just another Airbnb weekend trip, a little escape with some friends to celebrate finishing a brutal project at work. Nothing fancy, just a cabin in the woods with a fire pit, a few bottles of wine, and enough snacks to last the apocalypse. You know, one of those disconnect from everything and reset kind of weekends. We found this cute little place about 2 hours from the city, tucked away on the edge of some national forest. The reviews were great, cozy and clean, great for groups, and the perfect getaway. The listing did mention one weird thing. There's a locked room inside the house. Guests are not allowed to enter under any circumstances. Now, I've stayed at enough Airbnb rentals to know that sometimes owners use a room for storage or personal stuff. It seemed a little odd, sure, but not something to lose sleep over. If anything, it made us laugh. Oh, the forbidden room. Wonder what's inside? Dead bodies? Alien artifacts? We joked about it all the way up there. But by the time we arrived, the place looked so charming and peaceful that we completely forgot about the whole thing. The first night was perfect. We lit a fire, opened some wine, and played stupid board games until our faces hurt from laughing. Around midnight, the fire started dying down, and the group slowly drifted off to bed. I was one of the last ones up, finishing my drink on the couch while scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet, just the soft crackle of the last embers in the fireplace. And then I heard it. Thump. It wasn't loud, just a dull thud from somewhere upstairs, like something heavy being dropped. At first, I figured it was one of my friends knocking something over in their sleep. I shrugged it off and went to bed. But the next morning, over breakfast, I casually asked if anyone else had heard it. No one had, not even Kelly, who'd been sleeping in the room closest to the noise. She just gave me a weird look and said, "You sure you didn't dream it?" I laughed it off and told myself she was probably right. But still, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. What if it wasn't a dream? The second night was when things got strange. We had spent the whole day hiking and exploring, so by the time we got back to the cabin, everyone was exhausted. After dinner, people started drifting off to bed earlier. Around 1 a.m., I found myself lying awake, unable to sleep. Something just felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like the air in the cabin had shifted somehow. Heavier, like someone was watching me. That's when I heard it again. Thump. This time, it was louder, coming from upstairs near the forbidden room. My heart started pounding, but I told myself it was nothing. Cabins make noise. It's just old wood settling. That's what I kept telling myself as I climbed out of bed, my curiosity getting the better of me. I grabbed my phone for light and tiptoed into the hallway, listening for any signs that someone else was awake. The house was silent. I crept upstairs, my footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The closer I got to the locked room, the heavier the air felt, like the whole house was holding its breath. My hand trembled as I reached the top of the stairs, where the door stood, perfectly ordinary and yet somehow wrong. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart racing in my chest, trying to convince myself to go back to bed. But then I heard it again. Thump, thump. It was coming from inside the locked room. Suddenly, my phone screen flickered, casting just enough light for me to see something I hadn't noticed before. Scratches. Tiny, deep grooves etched into the wooden door frame, as if someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out. My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly, my breathing shallow. That's when the doorknob twitched, just the slightest movement, but enough to send me flying down the stairs. I scrambled back into my room, locked the door, and dove under the covers like a kid trying to hide from a monster. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and the house was filled with the smell of bacon and coffee. Everything felt normal, safe even. Maybe it had all been in my head, a product of too little sleep and too many ghost stories. Except for one thing, when we sat down to breakfast, Kelly mentioned she'd had a strange dream. It was so weird, she said, pouring syrup on her pancakes. I dreamt I was standing outside the locked room, and someone was calling my name from inside. I knew I shouldn't open the door, but I couldn't help it. I reached for the knob, and right before I opened it, I woke up. The table went silent. My blood ran cold. We all exchanged uneasy glances, and I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. What the hell is behind that door? We decided, stupidly, that we had to find out. After breakfast, we all went upstairs to the forbidden room, armed with nothing but our phones and nerves of steel, or so we thought. The door looked ordinary in the daylight, but the scratches were still there, jagged and deep. My friend Jake grabbed the doorknob and gave it a firm twist. It was locked, of course. Maybe there's a key somewhere? Kelly suggested. We spent the next 20 minutes searching the cabin, drawers, closets, under furniture, until Jake finally found an old, rusted key tucked inside the fireplace mantel. His face lit up with excitement. "This has to be it," he said, holding the key up like he'd just found buried treasure. My stomach churned as he slid the key into the lock. Part of me wanted to scream, "Don't open it," but it was too late. The lock clicked, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside the room was nothing, just an empty space. No furniture, no boxes, no creepy artifacts, just 4 bare walls and a window that looked out over the forest. Relief washed over us, and we laughed at ourselves for being so paranoid. But then I noticed something. The window was open, and on the windowsill, there were fresh scratches leading out into the forest. That's when we heard it. Thump. Not from inside the house, but from outside, somewhere deep in the woods. We slammed the door shut, locked it, and left the cabin that morning, cutting the trip short without saying a word to each other. We haven't talked about it since, but every so often late at night I think about that open window, and I wonder if whatever was in that room is still out there, waiting. It was winter when things started to shift between us, just cold enough that the wind stung your face, but not quite cold enough for snow. We were coming out of one of those comfortable ruts long-term couples get stuck in, the kind where you stop trying to impress each other but still feel like everything's fine. At least that's what I thought. Then came the scarf. It was bright red, too bright for him. He'd always been a muted tones and neutral colors kind of guy. When I first saw it dangling over the back of our couch, I laughed and asked, "Where'd you steal that from? Some fashionista on the street?" He chuckled a little too casually. "Nah, a buddy from work left it in my car. Thought I'd hang on to it until I see him again." "Must be some buddy," I joked, twirling the scarf between my fingers. It smelled faintly of vanilla and something floral, a scent I couldn't quite place but knew wasn't mine. "You didn't strike me as the scarf-borrowing type." He shrugged. "It's just a scarf, babe." I smiled, but something about it sat wrong with me. Just a little off, like a chair that wobbles slightly when you sit down. But I let it go. I mean, who overthinks a scarf, right? Except, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, the scarf was still on the couch. I'd started to think of it as a red flag, literally, and every time I walked past it, my stomach did a little flip. Why hadn't he returned it yet? I thought about asking him again, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I tried convincing myself it was nothing. I told myself that relationships go through weird phases. Maybe he was stressed at work. Maybe I was overanalyzing. Maybe I needed to chill the hell out. But then came the second lie. He told me he was going out with some old college buddies that Saturday night. I had no reason to doubt him. We had one of those relationships built on trust. Open phones, shared calendars, no weird secrets. Or so I thought. I remember texting him around 10 p.m. that night. Just a quick, hope you're having fun. He didn't respond until hours later, close to 2 a.m. His reply was short and weirdly formal. Home safe. Talk tomorrow. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't the lateness or the weird phrasing that did it. It was the tone. It read like someone trying too hard to sound normal. Like someone who'd rehearsed what to say. I stared at the message, feeling the first real cracks splinter through the foundation of everything I thought we had. But I said nothing. Not yet. The next morning I played it cool. Asked him how his night went. He gave me the usual. It was good. Just beers, you know. Caught up with the guys. He smiled while saying it, but it didn't reach his eyes. I waited. If you want the truth, sometimes all you need to do is wait. People tend to fill silences when they're nervous. Sure enough, after a beat, he added, "You should come next time." Next time? That's when I knew he was lying. There wasn't going to be a next time because there had never been a this time. But I kept my smile plastered on, pretending I didn't notice the tension in his shoulders or the way his hand hovered just a little too long over his phone on the table, like he was afraid I'd snatch it. Over the next few weeks, things unraveled slowly, like a sweater with a loose thread. He started working late more often. He was distracted all the time, forgetting plans we made or zoning out mid-conversation. The easy intimacy we'd built over the years evaporated, replaced by awkward silences and excuses that didn't quite add up. And then there were the new clothes. He wasn't exactly the fashion-forward type. Before, his idea of dressing up was ironing his old college hoodie. But suddenly, he was buying slim-fit shirts and leather shoes. The kind of things you wear when you're trying to impress someone. Got a promotion I don't know about. I teased one morning, tugging playfully on his new jacket. He laughed, but there was something distant about it. Just trying to switch things up. For who? I wanted to ask, but the words got stuck in my throat. Then one night, the universe handed me the answer I didn't want but desperately needed. He was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen, just a reflex. I wasn't planning to snoop, but the name on the notification stopped me cold. Amber. I didn't know any Amber. As far as I knew, neither did he. The message preview read, "Miss you already." Last night was amazing, red heart. I felt my heart drop to my stomach. For a moment, I just stood there frozen in place, my hands trembling. The air felt too thick to breathe, and my brain raced to keep up with the tidal wave of emotions crashing through me. When he came out of the bathroom, towel slung low on his hips, I was still holding his phone. His eyes widened the moment he saw it. "What are you doing?" I looked up at him, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I didn't bother hiding my hurt. "Who's Amber?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. The color drained from his face. In that instant, I saw everything I needed to know. He didn't even try to deny it. He just stood there, dripping water onto the floor, looking like a child caught stealing candy. "How long?" I whispered. He sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face. "It's not what you think," he mumbled. "It never is," I said bitterly. He told me they'd met at work, that it had just happened, that he never meant for it to go this far. The usual script. I sat there listening to his excuses, feeling like I was floating outside my body. How had I missed this? How had we gone from Sunday morning pancakes and lazy movie nights to this? When he finally finished his pathetic explanation, I stood up and grabbed my coat. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic flashing in his eyes. "Out," I said. He reached for my arm, but I shook him off. "Please, let's talk about this," he begged. I turned to face him one last time, feeling strangely calm. There's nothing left to say. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving him sitting on the edge of the bed, the sound of my footsteps fading into the cold night air. The red scarf was still draped over the back of the couch as I left, like a ghost of everything that could have been but never was. And just like that, I knew I'd never come back. I should have seen the red flags sooner. Looking back, they were practically screaming at me, but you know how it is. You ignore them because at the start, everything feels so damn good. The chemistry, the conversations, the way they look at you like you're the most interesting person in the room. that heady rush that makes you think this could be something real. And when you've been through enough bad dates, you want to believe it's finally your turn for something good. That's how it was with Chris. We met on a dating app, of course, because where else do people even meet anymore? But from the beginning, it felt different. He didn't play games. He texted back quickly, asked thoughtful questions, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. None of that, "Hey, what's up?" nonsense at 11 p.m. He made an effort, and after a couple of weeks of texting and FaceTiming, we finally met in person. The date was perfect. We went to this rooftop bar with twinkling fairy lights and a live jazz band, and for a moment, it felt like I'd walked into a movie scene. He held the door open for me, pulled out my chair, and even remembered that I mentioned liking gin cocktails. Every interaction felt easy, natural. We laughed over shared jokes, talked about everything from travel plans to family drama. And at one point, he reached across the table to brush a stray hair behind my ear. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what it's supposed to feel like. He didn't wait 3 days to text after the date, either. That same night, as soon as I got home, he sent me a message. "Tonight was amazing. I can't wait to see you again." I went to bed with a grin on my face, thinking, finally. Maybe the universe wasn't against me after all. For the next couple of months, everything with Chris was easy, effortless. He remembered little things like how I take my coffee or the name of my childhood dog. He was affectionate, consistent, and never made me feel like I had to chase him for attention. It was the kind of connection I'd spent years searching for, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself relax. That's the thing they don't tell you about being disappointed over and over again. It makes you tense. Even when things are going well, you're waiting for the other person to drop the ball, waiting for something to go wrong. But with Chris, I stopped waiting. I thought, this time it's different. This time, it's real. And then, just like that, it wasn't. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was scrolling through Instagram, minding my own business, when I saw a picture that stopped me cold. It was Chris, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, both of them grinning from ear to ear. The caption? "Celebrating 2 years with this amazing man, Redheart." I think I stared at that photo for a full minute before my brain could even process what I was looking at. 2 years? 2 years? My stomach twisted into knots as I scrolled through the comments, reading all the sweet messages from their friends. "You two are the cutest. Couple goals. So happy for you both." Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying not to throw my phone across the room. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as the realization hit me. Chris had been in a relationship this entire time. The affectionate texts, the dates, the future plans, all of it was a lie. A carefully constructed illusion to make me think I was the only one when, in reality, I'd been part of some twisted side game. I wanted to scream, cry, throw things. Instead, I sat there numb. Because what do you even do in a moment like that? How do you process the fact that the person you were falling for didn't just break your heart? They shattered your trust in a way that's hard to recover from. I spent the next few hours scrolling back through our messages, trying to figure out how I missed it, how I didn't see the signs. And sure enough, there they were in hindsight, weekends when he was too busy to hang out, texts that went unanswered for hours, vague explanations that I'd brushed off as nothing at the time. I felt stupid. So stupid. I confronted him, of course. Sent him a long, angry message demanding answers. And you know what the worst part was? He didn't even deny it. His response? "I didn't mean to hurt you. I care about you, but things are complicated." Complicated. That's what he called it. Like his betrayal was just a scheduling conflict. Like it was no big deal that he'd made me believe in something that never actually existed. I blocked him immediately after that, deleted his number, unfollowed him on every platform, and threw myself into anything that would keep me from thinking about him. But the thing is, the damage was already done. It's not just about the betrayal. It's about what comes after. Because now, every time someone new shows interest in me, there's a little voice in the back of my head that whispers, what if they're lying too? What if this person is just another Chris, waiting to pull the rug out from under me the moment I start to feel safe? I try not to let it get to me, but the truth is it's exhausting. Trust isn't something you can just turn back on like a light switch. And once it's broken, it takes a hell of a lot to rebuild. People tell me I should get back out there, that I shouldn't let one bad experience ruin my faith in love. But it's not that simple. It's not about one experience. It's about the way each disappointment chips away at you, little by little, until there's barely anything left to give. And that's the part people don't understand. They think heartbreak is just about missing someone, but it's more than that. It's about losing the version of yourself that was open and hopeful, the part of you that believed in happy endings. I'm trying. I really am. But some days it feels like I'm just going through the motions, pretending to care when deep down I don't know if I do anymore. Because how many times can you let yourself fall before you stop believing that someone will catch you? How many times can you pick up the pieces before you stop seeing the point? I used to think love was worth the risk. Now, I'm not so sure. Maybe one day, someone will prove me wrong. But until then, I'm keeping my heart locked away, safe behind walls I've built brick by brick. Because I've learned the hard way that not everyone who says they care actually means it. And some lessons, they stick with you forever. It started with the umbrella, a cheap, black one I bought off a street vendor for $10. Nothing fancy, just something to get me through the kind of drizzle that makes people walk faster without admitting they're annoyed. I didn't even think I needed it that morning. Clouds were scattered, and I was feeling optimistic, which was my first mistake. I took the umbrella with me anyway. Something about it felt practical, like carrying a safety net. And as with most safety nets, the moment you forget about them is exactly when life decides to yank the rug from under you. The day was already off to a rough start. I was running late, and the bus pulled away just as I reached the corner. The driver saw me. I swear we made eye contact. I jogged a few steps to chase it, hoping against all logic that maybe, just maybe, it would stop. It didn't. So I stood there, panting and wet from the effort, watching it disappear down the street with the slow inevitability of disappointment. Figures, I muttered, adjusting my bag and pulling out my phone to check the next bus. 12 minutes. Of course. Just enough time to be late for the meeting I'd spent the last week dreading. The wind picked up, tossing my hair into my face, and I decided to walk to the station instead of waiting around. Maybe moving would make me feel less useless. That's when it started raining. Not a light sprinkle. Oh no, it was a full-on torrential downpour, the kind that makes the sky feel personal. It came out of nowhere, like the weather had been lying in wait just for me. I reached into my bag, grateful for my small act of foresight. I yanked out the umbrella, pressed the button to open it. Nothing. I tried again, harder this time, jamming my thumb against the button. Still nothing. It just sat there, smug and useless. The wind gusted hard, whipping the rain sideways, and in a moment of frustration, I whacked the umbrella against my thigh. With a sad little snap, the thing finally opened and immediately flipped inside out. I stood there for a moment, holding a mangled excuse for an umbrella, wondering if this was some cosmic joke. Water dripped off my nose, soaking into my jacket as people rushed past me with their sturdy, functioning umbrellas. I looked at mine flapping pathetically in the wind, bent at the ribs, and wanted to scream, but instead I laughed. It wasn't even funny, but something about standing there, drenched, holding a broken umbrella at 8:42 a.m. felt absurd in a way that could only be met with hysteria. I shoved the thing back into my bag, where it belonged, and trudged toward the station, shoes squelching with every step. By the time I made it to the subway, the train was already packed. The kind of packed where everyone pretends they don't see each other, like it's an unspoken agreement to ignore the fact that we're all pressed together in a damp, miserable tangle of humanity. I squeezed into a corner, clutching the pole for balance, trying not to breathe in the overwhelming mix of wet coats and stale coffee. The train jerked forward, and that's when I saw it, a perfectly good umbrella, tucked neatly on the seat across from me. It was one of those expensive, wind-resistant ones. The kind that folds up small, but expands like a tent. The kind I would never buy for myself because somehow, every year, I convince myself I won't need it. And there it was abandoned, no owner in sight. I stared at it for a long moment, torn between the strange moral dilemma of taking it or leaving it behind. A dozen justifications swirled in my mind. It's public property now. Finders keepers. Someone's probably forgotten about it by now. And then, just as quickly, it's stealing. What if someone comes back for it? What if this umbrella has sentimental value? Which, let's be honest, was ridiculous. No one gets emotionally attached to an umbrella. Or so I told myself as the train rattled on. The umbrella sat there, mocking me with its perfection like a prize I hadn't earned. I glanced around, waiting for someone to claim it. Nobody did. When the train pulled into the next station, I grabbed it. Not casually, either. I snatched it like a kid stealing candy, tucking it under my arm as if someone might tackle me for it at any moment. My heart raced, which was stupid, because who gets adrenaline from stealing an umbrella? But there I was, clutching it like I just pulled off the heist of the century. The rest of the ride, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What kind of person takes an umbrella from a subway seat? Was this really who I was now? I tried to justify it again. It's just an umbrella. No big deal. People leave things behind all the time, but it felt like a big deal. Not the umbrella itself, but what it represented, a tiny failure of character. And the more I thought about it, the heavier it felt. When I got off the train, I stood on the platform for a minute, debating whether to leave it behind. I could just set it down on a bench, walk away, and pretend the whole thing never happened. But I didn't. The rain was still coming down in sheets when I stepped outside, and instinct took over. I popped the umbrella open, shielding myself from the storm. It worked perfectly. Not a single gust flipped it inside out. No drips, no leaks. Just smooth, dry bliss. For the first time that morning, I felt like I was winning. And then, as I crossed the street, I saw him. A guy about my age, soaked to the bone, standing under a cafe awning and patting his empty pockets, looking lost. It took me a second to connect the dots, but when I did, my stomach sank. I knew. Somehow, I just knew that was his umbrella. He wasn't even looking at me. He was too busy staring at the rain, probably wondering where the hell he'd left his only defense against the weather. I could have kept walking. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. "Hey," I called, holding the umbrella slightly aloft. "This yours?" He blinked, surprised, and then recognition flickered across his face. "Oh my God." "Yeah." I left it on the train. I smiled weakly, handing it over. "Found it for you." He grinned, the kind of grin that could make someone's day. "You're a lifesaver, man." I thought I'd have to swim home. I nodded, stuffing my hands into my pockets as the rain drenched me anew. "No problem." He popped the umbrella open with a satisfied whoosh, gave me a quick wave, and jogged off down the street, dry and victorious. And just like that, I was back where I started, soaked, cold, and now morally upright, but somehow worse for it. I stood there for a moment, rain pouring down my face, and laughed. Because of course, the one time I tried to take something for myself, the universe had to throw a plot twist at me. I walked the rest of the way home without an umbrella. By the time I got to my door, I looked like I'd fallen into a river. And yet, weirdly enough, I felt lighter. It wasn't the umbrella or the rain or even the awkward encounter that stuck with me. It was the strange comfort of realizing that sometimes life lets you choose between being the person you want to be and the person you almost became. And for once, I'd chosen right. Not that it made me any drier, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. It was supposed to be a simple weekend. My girlfriend, Alyssa, and I had planned a getaway to her family's old cabin deep in the woods, about 2 hours from the nearest town. We wanted a break from the noise. No emails, no phones, just us, a fire pit, and some cheap wine. Alyssa had spent summers there as a kid, and she swore it was her favorite place in the world. I wasn't a big outdoors guy, but I liked the idea of a quiet weekend. The first day was perfect. We got there in the early afternoon, cracked open a bottle of wine, and spent the evening watching the stars come out. It was dead quiet out there, in a way I wasn't used to. No cars, no voices, just the wind in the trees. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. It started small, just a feeling in the back of my head. I'd brushed it off at first, assuming it was just the weird adjustment of going from city noise to nothing. But as the night dragged on, the quiet began to feel oppressive. I remember staring at the fire pit as Alyssa told some story from her childhood, but I wasn't really listening. I was distracted by something I couldn't quite name. The air felt heavier somehow, like the silence was pressing down on us. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, scanning the dark tree line that surrounded the cabin. Nothing was there, just shadows and the occasional rustle of leaves. But it was enough to set me on edge. At around midnight, Alyssa said she was going to bed. I told her I'd be in soon, but I stayed by the fire a little longer. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I sat there in the dark, listening to the forest, trying to convince myself that it was just nerves. Then I heard it, a single footstep in the leaves behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. A slow, heavy crunch like someone trying not to be noticed. My heart jumped to my throat. I spun around, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. Just darkness. I stayed frozen in place, every muscle in my body tight, listening for another sound. For a moment, there was nothing, just the wind and the crackling fire. Then I heard it again, closer this time. I bolted for the cabin. I didn't run, I sprinted. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was terrified. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it with shaking hands. Alyssa sat up in bed, startled by the noise. I tried to explain, but I must have sounded like a lunatic, mumbling about footsteps in the dark. She rolled her eyes, said I was probably just spooking myself, and told me to come to bed. I almost believed her. Almost. I crawled into bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those footsteps again in my mind. I tossed and turned for hours, listening for any sign that someone was outside. But the night stayed quiet. Too quiet. When I finally drifted off, it wasn't restful. My dreams were filled with shadows and slow, creeping footsteps. I woke to the sound of knocking. It wasn't the polite, friendly kind of knock. It was loud, deliberate. 3 hard raps on the cabin door. My heart slammed against my ribs as I checked the time. It was just after 3 a.m. Alyssa stirred beside me, half asleep. "What the hell?" she mumbled. I didn't answer. I was too busy staring at the door, willing whoever it was to go away. The knocks came again, louder this time. Whoever it was, they weren't leaving. Alyssa sat up, rubbing her eyes, still not fully awake. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity. Then the handle jiggled. We both froze. The door was locked. Thank God. But hearing the handle twist and rattle sent a cold wave of fear through my body. Whoever was out there wasn't just knocking. They were trying to get in. Alyssa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Who the hell is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward the door. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I needed to see who it was. I peeked through the small glass pane at the top of the door, and my blood ran cold. There was a man standing on the porch. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a dirty brown jacket and an old baseball cap. His face was shadowed, but I could see his eyes. They were wide, too wide, and staring right at the door like he knew I was watching. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl. Slow, deliberate, like he was savoring something. Then, without breaking eye contact, he knocked again. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I stumbled back from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "There's a guy out there," I whispered to Alyssa. "He's trying to get in." Her eyes went wide, and she grabbed her phone from the nightstand. "I'll call the cops," she whispered. She tapped the screen a few times, then looked up at me, panic spreading across her face. No service. Of course. We were in the middle of nowhere. The man jiggled the handle again, harder this time, like he was testing how much force it would take to break the lock. Alyssa grabbed my arm, her voice rising in panic. What do we do? I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that we couldn't stay in the cabin. We needed to leave now. I grabbed the car keys from the kitchen counter and whispered to Alyssa, "We're making a run for it. Get your shoes on." We moved as quietly as we could, but every creak of the wooden floorboards felt deafening. The man on the porch must have heard us, because he started pounding on the door now, loud, frantic thuds that shook the entire cabin. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. I threw the door open, and we sprinted for the car. The man shouted something behind us, a loud, guttural yell that I didn't understand. I could hear his footsteps pounding after us as we fumbled with the car doors. We barely got inside before he reached us. I slammed the locks down, threw the car into reverse, and peeled out of the driveway. The man stood in the middle of the road, watching us with that same awful smile as we sped away. We didn't stop until we were halfway back to town, heartbeats still racing. When we finally felt safe enough to pull over, Alyssa looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Who the hell was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that if we hadn't left when we did, we might not have left at all. So, it all started one night during the lockdowns when the world felt like it was ending. I was stuck in my tiny apartment, binge-watching TV shows, eating instant noodles, and texting my best friend, Ben, way too much. He was my rock during that time, like we were already close before COVID, but quarantine made us even closer. Texting every day, FaceTime calls that lasted for hours, sharing playlists. You know the drill. The kind of friendship where you tell them every stupid thought in your head because, well, who else are you going to tell? One Friday night, we were both a little too deep into our quarantine routine. Wine, old movies, and venting about life. It was innocent at first, just two best friends drinking over Zoom. But that night, Ben texted me, "Want to come over? I think we both need real company." I hesitated for like 2 seconds. I knew I shouldn't. We were supposed to stay isolated, stay safe. But the thought of being alone for another night just sounded unbearable. Plus, Ben always felt like home. So, I went. It felt familiar and comforting, like slipping into an old hoodie. We made some pasta, killed a bottle of red wine, and curled up on his couch to watch something dumb on Netflix. At some point, my head ended up on his shoulder, and I remember thinking how warm he felt. I told myself, it's just Ben, no big deal. We always cuddle, but this time it was different. His hand brushed against my knee, and instead of moving it away, I let it linger. And that was it. 1 second we were laughing at some bad movie, and the next we were kissing. It happened so fast that I barely remember who made the first move. 1 minute we were friends, and the next I was pulling him closer, melting into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't talk, just kissed. I could feel his hands trembling slightly, and I thought, he's as nervous as I am. Somehow, that made it feel even more intimate. I remember thinking, this has been my best friend. What the hell are we doing? But instead of stopping, we just kept going. We stumbled into his bedroom. Hands everywhere, clothes coming off like it was the most obvious next step. I remember the way he looked at me, like he was trying to memorize every detail, as if he wasn't sure this would ever happen again. And I remember thinking, this is a mistake. A beautiful, perfect, stupid mistake. The next morning, I woke up in his bed, tangled in his sheets, with sunlight spilling through the curtains. For a moment, I forgot everything, where I was, what we'd done, and then it hit me. Oh my God, I slept with Ben, my best friend. He was still asleep beside me, looking so peaceful that I almost hated to wake him. Almost. I nudged his shoulder. "Hey Ben, you awake?" He groaned, half asleep. "MMM. Yeah, hey." And just like that, everything felt weird. The easy comfort we always had, gone. I sat up, pulling the blanket around me like it was armor. "So, what happens now?" Ben blinked a few times, clearly still processing everything. "I don't know," he said softly. "Do you regret it?" That question hit me harder than I expected. Did I? Honestly, I didn't know. I just knew that everything felt different now, like we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. "Do you?" I asked, hoping he'd say no, hoping he'd laugh it off, make a joke, tell me it wasn't a big deal. He didn't. "I don't regret it," he said, "but I don't know where this leaves us." We sat in silence for a while, both of us too scared to say the wrong thing. Eventually, I got dressed and told him I needed to go home. He walked me to the door, gave me this awkward half-hug, and said, "Text me when you get home, okay?" I did, but things weren't the same after that. For the next few days, we tiptoed around the subject, pretending like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. The easy, carefree vibe we used to have was gone, replaced by this heavy, unspoken tension. And the worst part? I missed him. I missed him so much it hurt. We tried to hang out like normal, watching movies, grabbing takeout, but every time I looked at him, all I could think about was that night. The way his hands felt on my skin, the way he whispered my name, and I could tell he was thinking about it too, because whenever our hands accidentally brushed, he'd pull away like he'd been burned. Finally, after a few weeks of awkwardness, I couldn't take it anymore. I invited him over. determined to clear the air. We sat on my couch, both of us fidgeting, neither of us brave enough to speak first. "Ben," I said finally, "we need to talk about what happened." He nodded, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Yeah, we do." I took a deep breath. I don't know how to feel about it. I mean, it was amazing, but you're my best friend. What if we ruin everything? Ben ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted. "I've been thinking the same thing." But he hesitated, then added quietly, "What if it wasn't a mistake?" Those words hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like, being with Ben, really being with him. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. "But what if it is?" I whispered, barely able to say the words out loud. He gave me a sad smile. "Then we figure it out, together." And just like that, the weight lifted off my chest. Maybe we didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe things would get messy, complicated. But for the first time since that night, I felt hopeful. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't jump into anything. But we talked, really talked. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could be more than friends. It's been a year since that conversation. We're still figuring things out, dating, loving, stumbling along the way. It's not perfect, but it's real. And every day, I'm grateful that I took the risk. Because sometimes, the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And Ben? He's still my best friend. But now, he's so much more than that. The rain started halfway through my drive, turning the highway into a blurred mess of gray streaks and glowing brake lights. I hadn't planned on coming back, but then again, most of the important decisions in my life have been made with a half tank of gas and no real plan. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Another text from my sister, Ellie. "Where are you?" I ignored it. She'd already sent 3 texts and a voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know what it said. "Mom's not doing great. She's asking for you." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The wipers dragged across the windshield with a dull screech, smearing rain instead of clearing it. Coming home was supposed to be a last resort, not something I had to do on a rainy Thursday because Mom forgot how to take her pills. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same, weathered, sagging slightly at the edges, like it had been holding its breath since I left. I sat there for a minute, engine running, watching the porch light flicker in the downpour. The air smelled like wet earth and regret. Ellie must have heard my car because she opened the front door and stood there in her sweatshirt, arms crossed like she was daring me to bolt. I turned off the engine, grabbed my duffel from the passenger seat, and stepped into the rain. "You took your time," she said as I jogged up the steps. "Good to see you too." Inside, the house was warm, but it smelled faintly like bleach and something sour, the way hospitals do when they try to cover the scent of sickness. Mom was in the living room, sunk into the old recliner that we'd meant to throw out years ago. Her hair was thinner now, gray strands falling against her pale skin. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes glassy. For a moment, it didn't seem like she recognized me. Then a small, tired smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "There you are," she whispered, as if I'd just been in the next room all along. "Here I am," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Ellie lingered behind me, arms still crossed, like she was waiting for something. An apology, maybe, or some kind of explanation for why I hadn't come sooner. But I didn't have one to give. Instead, I walked over to the recliner, crouched down beside Mom, and took her hand. It felt light, like holding a bundle of dry twigs. "You look tired," she said softly. "Yeah, well, long drive." Her hand squeezed mine, just barely, but enough to make my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how much I missed that feeling. Ellie cleared her throat. The nurse came by earlier, said she hasn't been eating much. "We need to keep an eye on that." I nodded without looking up. I didn't trust myself to speak. Mom's breathing was slow, rattling faintly in her chest. I sat there with her for a long time, listening to the rain drum against the windows. Ellie eventually wandered into the kitchen, probably to pretend she wasn't crying. After a while, Mom's eyelids fluttered shut. I sat back on my heels, releasing her hand carefully, as if letting go too quickly might break her. My knees popped as I stood, and I realized with a dull kind of shock that I'd been holding that position far longer than I meant to. I found Ellie sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with the sort of blank stare people wear when they're too tired to care anymore. She glanced up as I sat down across from her. "She's been asking for you for weeks," Ellie said. "I thought you weren't going to come." "Yeah, well, I'm here now." "Barely." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Ellie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Look, I get it. This isn't easy. But it's not easy for me either, you know? I've been handling this alone for months." "I know." The words sounded hollow, like an echo of something that had been said too many times before. Ellie stared at me for a long moment, as if she was trying to figure out whether to be mad or just sad. Eventually, she settled on something in between. "She missed you," she said quietly. I swallowed hard. "I know." We sat there in silence, the kind that feels heavier than words. Ellie's phone buzzed again, but she didn't bother checking it this time. "You staying the night?" she asked eventually. "Yeah, just for a night or two." Ellie gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she didn't call me out on it. Instead, she nodded toward the guest room. "Sheets are clean. You know where everything is." The guest room was just as I remembered it. Same faded wallpaper, same creaky bed frame, same faint smell of mothballs. It was the kind of room that felt stuck in time, as if the clock had stopped ticking the moment I left. I dropped my duffel by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rain tap against the roof. At some point, Ellie knocked softly on the doorframe. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "Good," she said, lingering for a moment. "Because I'm not." Her voice cracked just slightly, and that was all it took for the guilt to hit me like a tidal wave. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but Ellie shook her head, already retreating down the hall. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how things had gotten this far off course. I thought about Mom, about Ellie, about all the versions of myself I'd abandoned along the way. And somewhere between the sound of the rain and the weight of my thoughts, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit. I hadn't stayed away because I was too busy. I'd stayed away because I didn't know how to come back. In the morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was still overcast, but there was a softness to the light filtering through the curtains. I found Ellie in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "You leaving already?" she asked without looking up. "Not yet," I said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. Ellie glanced at me, surprised. "You mean it?" I nodded, pouring myself a cup. "Yeah, I think I'll stay a while." She didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth lifted in something close to a smile. And just like that, the world felt a little less heavy. I told myself it would be just a fun night out. No expectations, no drama, just good vibes, cheap drinks, and some shameless flirting. Honestly, after a couple of months swiping through apps that felt more like scrolling through a grocery list of mediocre options, I needed something real. Or at least real enough for one night. You know how it goes, the fun single mantra, no feelings, no strings. Easy, right? So, my friend Emily convinced me to go to this bar downtown. The music was loud, the neon lights were flickering, and the crowd was just the right kind of rowdy. Within 10 minutes, I had a gin and tonic in my hand and had already locked eyes with a guy across the room. You know the type, clean cut but with just enough scruff to suggest he makes bad decisions on weekends. His smile was one of those dangerous ones that promises more than it can probably deliver, but in the moment I didn't care. The new me was here for a good time, not a deep dive into someone's emotional baggage. Naturally, we started talking, or rather, he started charming me with dad jokes that were so bad I couldn't stop laughing. Somehow, "Why don't skeletons fight each other? They don't have the guts," became the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Maybe it was the gin, but I found myself thinking, okay, this guy might actually be fun. His name was Nate, and from the second we clinked glasses, it felt like we'd known each other forever. We talked about everything, favorite TV shows, the worst jobs we'd ever had, and the dumbest things we did in high school. The chemistry was undeniable, and by drink 3, we weren't even pretending to be subtle anymore. At some point, we found ourselves on the bar's rooftop terrace, leaning against the railing with our faces inches apart. There was that electric moment of silence, and then he kissed me. And let me tell you, it wasn't one of those sloppy, let's get this over with kisses. It was deliberate, confident, like he already knew exactly how I like to be kissed. My brain was screaming, "This is exactly what you needed." Next thing I knew, we were stumbling out of the bar, laughing like idiots as we tried to hail a cab. When we finally got to his place, a surprisingly neat loft with actual framed art on the walls, I made a mental note. Either he has great taste or he's hiding a girlfriend. But that thought disappeared the second he kissed me again, and, well, things escalated quickly from there. The night was everything I hoped it would be. Intense, exhilarating, and most importantly, uncomplicated. We didn't talk about anything serious, didn't make any promises, and didn't get too deep. Just two people enjoying each other's company for one night. Or so I thought. The morning, though, that's when things got weird. I woke up tangled in his sheets, sunlight pouring through the windows, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. He was still asleep, his arm draped lazily over my waist, and I thought, this is nice. Maybe too nice. My usual post-hookup routine involves slipping out quietly, leaving behind only a text that said, "Thanks, had fun, bye." But something about this felt different. And then Nate woke up, looked at me with that same stupid grin, and said, "Want to get breakfast?" That's when the panic hit. Breakfast? Who the hell offers breakfast after a one-night stand? That's not in the handbook. Casual sex doesn't come with pancakes, right? But because I apparently make bad decisions under pressure, I said yes. We ended up at this tiny diner down the street, sitting in a booth that smelled like maple syrup and coffee. And here's the thing, I had fun, like real fun. We talked and laughed like old friends. And at some point, he reached across the table to steal a fry off my plate without asking. And I didn't even mind. If you know me, you'd know that's a big deal. By the time the check arrived, I was starting to feel things. Dangerous things. Like, what if this wasn't just a one-time thing? What if Nate wasn't just some random hookup, but someone I could actually like? I hated myself for it. This wasn't the plan. The plan was no strings, no complications, no feelings. But there I was sitting across from him, wondering what it would be like to do this again. And again, and again. Then, just as I was starting to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something more, he leaned back in his seat, smiled, and said, "So, this was fun. Let's not make it weird, okay?" Boom. There it was. The classic, let's not make it weird line. The polite way of saying, thanks for the fun, but don't get your hopes up. And just like that, the fantasy bubble popped. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course. No weirdness here." But inside, it stung a little. I mean, I knew what this was going in, but somewhere between the gin and the pancakes, I let myself forget. Rookie mistake. We hugged goodbye, and as I walked back to my apartment, I kept telling myself it was fine. This was what I wanted, right? No strings, no attachments, just a fun night. So why did it feel like I just lost something I didn't even know I wanted? That night taught me a hard lesson. I'm not built for casual hookups. No matter how much I try to convince myself that I can keep things light and fun, my heart always seems to sneak in through the back door. I don't regret the night I spent with Nate. It was fun, and in the moment, it was exactly what I needed. But it also showed me that I can't compartmentalize intimacy the way some people can. And that's okay. Not everyone is cut out for casual sex, and there's no shame in that. Some of us are just wired for deeper connections, and pretending otherwise only makes things messy. So, while I might not swear off flings entirely, I know now to tread carefully. No more convincing myself I can stay detached when I know damn well I can't. And if I ever do find myself in another whirlwind night like that, at least I'll go in with my eyes wide open and maybe skip the breakfast invitation. Let me tell you about the dumbest thing I've ever done on the road, and how I learned just how quickly 1 second can decide if you live or die. I was about 24 at the time, driving my old hand-me-down sedan. The thing was practically held together by duct tape and optimism, but it ran, and that's all that mattered. I was in the middle of a summer heat wave, driving back from my buddy's place after a long day. The windows were down because, of course, my AC was busted. Sweat stuck to my back like I just wrestled a bear, and my patience for humanity was running on fumes. Then it happened. Someone cut me off. No blinker, no glance in the rearview mirror, just that arrogant swerve that says, "My world, my rules." My blood boiled instantly. There's something about getting cut off that feels personal, even though it's not. Like, how dare this dude decide his life is worth more than my front bumper? So naturally, instead of letting it go like a mature adult, I sped up to return the favor. Yeah, I know, real genius stuff. I tailgated him for a bit, riding so close I could practically see the brand of his air freshener. I wasn't going to do anything crazy, just make him feel the inconvenience he'd caused me. Petty? Absolutely. But I was hot, annoyed, and way too proud to just back down. At this point, we're both in the fast lane, cruising at about 75 miles per hour, and traffic is starting to build. That's when my brain decided it was time to get creative. I thought, what if I gave him a little brake check? Just a tap, enough to spook him, make him think twice before pulling a stunt like that again. It was going to be the perfect revenge. My inner voice was like, what could go wrong? It's just a tap. I waited for the perfect moment. We were on a slight downhill, boxed in by traffic on either side. He was still right on my tail, practically in my trunk, when I tapped the brakes. Big, freaking mistake. In the split second it took for me to realize how bad this idea was, I heard that unmistakable, heart-stopping screech of tires. His SUV fishtailed slightly, and for a moment it looked like he was about to spin out. My heart dropped to my stomach. I slammed on the gas, trying to put some distance between us, but it was too late. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The massive grille of a semi-truck bearing down behind us. Way too close for comfort. You know that split second when time stretches, and you suddenly regret every decision you've ever made? That was me. My whole life flashed before my eyes, my 8th grade talent show, my first car, that weird breakup in college, and all I could think was, this is how it ends. I'm gonna die, because I was too stubborn to let some jerk merge in front of me. The semi-truck's brakes screamed like banshees, but we were all going way too fast. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, bracing for the inevitable impact. For a second, the only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, somehow, by some miracle, the truck managed to swerve just enough to avoid plowing into the SUV. I saw it in my rearview mirror, the semi's trailer jackknifing slightly as the driver fought to control it, his horn blaring in protest. The SUV wobbled like a drunken toddler, but stayed on the road, missing the median by inches. I swerved back into the slow lane, breathing like I'd just run a marathon, while my heart threatened to beat right out of my chest. When it was over, when the SUV straightened out and the truck settled back into its lane, it hit me how close I'd come to causing a disaster. If that truck driver hadn't been paying attention, or if the SUV had spun out, it would have been carnage. Not just a fender bender, but full-on news helicopters and highway closures for hours level destruction. And all because I couldn't swallow my pride and let some guy merge in front of me. The SUV driver sped up, probably deciding he wanted no part of whatever madness I was bringing to the road. I didn't blame him. As soon as he was gone, I pulled into the next rest stop, parked under a tree, and just sat there in silence. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. It felt like I'd narrowly avoided my own funeral. And the scariest part? It all happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second of anger, one stupid decision, and it almost cost me everything. I sat there for a while, replaying it in my mind. I thought about how easily that truck could have turned me into scrap metal. How fragile everything is when you're flying down the highway at 75 miles per hour, surrounded by other people's mistakes. I kept thinking, how close was I to not making it home that day? That was the day I swore off-road rage for good. I made a pact with myself. No more petty brake checks, no more tailgating, no more trying to teach random strangers a lesson. It's not worth it. The road doesn't care how justified you feel or how right you think you are. 1 second of ego-driven stupidity can take everything from you, and it won't give it back. To this day, I get nervous whenever I see a semi-truck behind me. I'll move over, let it pass, and give the driver a wide berth. It's not fear, it's respect. Those drivers are out there hauling thousands of pounds every day, sharing the road with idiots like me, and they're just trying to get home in one piece. So yeah, if someone cuts me off now, I let them. I'll curse under my breath, sure, but I let them go. Because no amount of righteous indignation is worth a trip to the morgue, or worse, dragging someone else along with you. If I've learned one thing from that experience, it's this: the highway is not the place for proving points. The stakes are way too high, and the margin for error is non-existent. One bad move, 1 second of lost focus or misjudged pride, and it's game over. So now, whenever I'm tempted to honk or tailgate or do anything dumb, I remember that day, the screeching tires, the semi-truck swerving, and the horrible, sinking realization that I almost died trying to win a stupid pissing contest with a stranger. And just like that, the anger fades, because nothing is worth losing your life over. Bye-bye. Until the next story.